Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I hereby declare open the 40th meeting of the 43rd session of the Human Rights Council. As you know, we're here this afternoon to hold an urgent debate on the current racially inspired human rights violations, systemic racism, police brutality against people of African descent, and violence against peaceful protests, as decided by the Council last Monday on the 15th of June. I bowed to all the victims, and so before we start, I would like to kindly request that we now stand to observe a moment of silence in the memory of all victims. Thank you. As you will recall, on Friday, the 12th of June, I received a letter from Burkina Faso on behalf of the African Group containing the formal request to hold this urgent debate. A draft resolution L50 entitled The Promotion and Protection of the Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms of Africans and People of African Descent against police brutality and other violations of human rights was tabled yesterday and circulated to all delegations. I would like to remind you that the list of speakers opened on Monday at 2 o'clock and will close in about 15 minutes. Let me recall once again that this urgent debate will follow the same modalities as any general debate of the Human Rights Council, and the speaking time will be 2.5 minutes for members and 1.5 minutes for all observers. I appeal to everyone to respect this. It is now my honor to welcome Her Excellency Mrs. Amina Mohammed, Deputy Secretary of the United Nations, who will participate from New York, Mrs. Michelle Bachelet, High Commissioner for Human Rights, His Excellency Mr. Thomas Kwesi Kwartey, Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission, who will participate from Addis Ababa. And without further ado, I will now give the floor to the Deputy Secretary General to deliver her statement. Madam, you have the floor.
Your Excellency, Ambassador Fischberg, the President of the Human Rights Council.
I'm afraid we cannot hear you. Maybe you still need to unmute yourself?
Can you hear me now, Ambassador?
I'm afraid we still can't hear you.
Okay, well, I don't know. It's working here. I think it's been muted from your end. Okay. We cannot do anything here.
Test 1, 2, 3, test.
Can you hear us? Can you hear us?
Yes, now I could hear you.
You can hear me now? Madam President, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you very much. Now I can hear you.
Thank you very very much. Your Excellency, President of the Human Rights Council, High Commissioner Michelle Bachelet, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome this opportunity to speak to this urgent and necessary debate of the Human Rights Council. I bring you warm greetings from Secretary General Antonio Guterres. What does that mean? So let them continue and I will come later.
I think we can hear you now.
Okay, wow, right, okay. Your Excellency, President of the Human Rights Council, our High Commissioner Michelle Bachelet, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome this opportunity to speak to this urgent and necessary debate of the Human Rights Council. I bring you warm greetings from Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who shares your abhorrence of racism and is committed to fighting it with every tool we have everywhere. Allow me to quote from the letter he sent last week to all United Nations staff. The position of the United Nations on racism is crystal clear. This scourge violates the United Nations Charter and debases our core values. The Secretary General has called for dismantling racist structures and confronting the systemic ills of institutions. In the United Nations, he has launched a one-year process to address these grave concerns of our staff. He has also called for massive investments in social cohesion. Diversity, as he has stressed, is a richness and not a threat. I wish to echo the recent cogent words of the Under-Secretary Generals of the UN, who are African or of African descent. In a statement 3 days ago, they stressed that, I quote, "Not enough can ever be said about the deep trauma and intergenerational suffering that has resulted from the racial injustice perpetrated through centuries, particularly against people of African descent. To merely condemn expressions and acts of racism is not enough. We must go beyond and do more." Excellencies, the Human Rights Council meets as marches for racial justice and equality fill the streets of cities and towns around the world. The most recent trigger for these protests was the killing of George Floyd in an appalling act of police brutality. But the violence spans history and borders alike across the globe. Today, people are saying loudly and movingly, enough. The United Nations has a duty to respond to the anguish that has been felt by so many for so long. This cause is at the heart of our organization's identity. Equal rights are enshrined in our founding charter. Just as we fought apartheid years ago, so must we fight the hatred, oppression, and humiliation today. We must also never forget the crimes and the negative impacts in Africa and beyond of the transatlantic slave trade, one of history's most appalling manifestations of human brutality. Across the world, Afro-descendants continue to be trapped in generational cycles of poverty created by unfair obstacles of their development. They receive unequal services and face unjustifiable housing and employment practices. Racial profiling is widespread. And because of poverty and structural racism, they are also among the communities hardest hit by COVID-19. As we recover from the pandemic, returning to these systems is absolutely out of the question. We also need measures that would genuinely reset law enforcement. Excellencies, the battle against racism did not end with this or that legislation, and racism was not vanquished by this or that election. The poison of racism still rages, and so the fight must still be waged. On a personal level, from my high school days in the United Kingdom, through my career across the private sector, in civil society, and now in the international public service, I have grown thick skin. I've even become numb, to the extent that one has forgotten how to feel the injustice of racial slurs and my human right to live a life of dignity and of respect. When I consider the beauty of my diversity and the amazing diversity of race, when I consider that we are born equal, only to find that the color of one's skin sentences us to a life of discrimination and injustice, I ask myself, and I ask all of you, I ask people everywhere, how can we possibly continue to turn the other way? Enough is enough. The world must rise to end racism in all its obnoxious forms. Let us turn the page of history today by making this a turning point, when we agree that all humans have the right to thrive with dignity and freedom from racism and discrimination in all its forms. I too, like Martin Luther King Jr., have a dream where my granddaughter Maya will grow up in a world where she will not be judged by the color of her skin, but by the strength of her character. Excellencies, lasting peace and sustainable development can only be built on the equality, human rights, and dignity of everyone. The United Nations, its leadership, and staff stands with all those who are pursuing the end to the scourge of racism in all its forms. This is today's sacred battle. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Secretary General. And I now give the floor to the High Commissioner for Refugees, Madam Michelle Bachelet, for her statement.
All right. It's the mask, you know. So, distinguished President, Excellencies, colleagues, and friends, since the killing of George Floyd at the hands of police in Minneapolis last month, a wave of massive protests have surged forward, not only across every state in the United States, but also in dozens of countries in Europe and all around the world. The act of gratuitous brutality has come to symbolize the systemic racism that harms millions of people of African descent, causing pervasive, daily, lifelong, generational, and too often lethal harm. It has become emblematic of the excessive use of disproportionate force by law enforcement against people of African descent, against people of color, and against indigenous peoples and racial and ethnic minorities in many countries across the globe. It has brought to a head the outrage of people who feel they are neither adequately served nor adequately heard by their governments. It has brought to their feet millions of allies, people who are now beginning to acknowledge the reality of systemic discrimination suffered by others, and to join their demand that every person in their countries be treated with equality, fairness, and respect. Today's protests are the culmination of many generations of pain and long struggles for equality. Too little has changed over too many years. We owe it to those who have gone before, as well as those to come, to seize the moment at long last to demand fundamental change and insist upon it. As 20 of my fellow senior UN leaders, each of African origin or descent, jointly wrote this week, and I will quote, "To merely condemn expressions and acts of racism is not enough. We must go beyond and do more." End of quote. The scale of today's protest and evidence of a transcending breadth of public support point towards a sea change in nations whose history has been intertwined with the twin evils of slavery and racism, and in which, despite the exemplary struggle of the civil rights movement, have never fully acknowledged their harm or eradicated their influence. As General Mark Milley, chairman of the US Joint Chief of Staff, acknowledged last week, talking about George Floyd's death, he said, his death amplified the pain, the frustration, the fear that so many of our fellow Americans live with day in and day out. The protests that have ensued speak not only to his killing, but to the centuries of injustice towards African Americans. Now, that end of quote. Now we need decisive action across the world, not only to reform or reimagine specific institutions and law enforcement agencies, important though that is, but to address the pervasive racism that corrodes institutions of government, entrenches inequality, and underlines so many violations of human rights. And the cycles of impunity which have permitted this to happen must end. From poor health care to inadequate education, limited job advancement, refusals of housing and mortgage loans, ill treatment by officials, practical restrictions on the right to vote, and over-incarceration in prisons, racial discrimination produces overwhelming harm to millions of people. I have been heartened to see some first measures now being taken by national and local authorities to implement reforms of practices related to policing that are long overdue. They include banning of chokeholds by police, rulings that prohibit the use of tear gas, rubber bullets and flash grenades against peaceful protesters, limitations on provision of military-grade weaponry to police forces, and perhaps most vital of all, measures to better ensure both prompt and effective accountability and prosecution for misconduct by security forces. Many are now also questioning the pervasive role of policing in some societies, where police are called upon to act as crisis managers, counselors, and social workers, and much besides, in part because of budget cuts to those public services essential to the common good. Concerns such as these are leading to more fundamental questions about whether we need to reconstruct from the ground up, rather than just reform in piecemeal fashion the approaches to policing in our societies. It is in the interest of every law enforcement officer to be held to a high and honorable standard. Whether or not they're filmed and go viral on social media, acts of misconduct by police personnel should be met with immediate investigation, sanction, or prosecution based on international standards. Clear guidance, such as the human rights guidelines on the use of less lethal weapons in law enforcement issued by my office last year, can be of assistance there. This accountability is also in the interest of every state. The rights, dignity, and equality of all are vital principles in themselves and crucial to the resilience and success of every society. I am disturbed by the criminal acts undertaken by a small number of people amid the many peaceful protests around the world, which have often harmed property of racial and ethnic minorities in acts of fresh victimization. Video evidence has also shown excessive use of force against protesters by police, including during entirely peaceful protests. All these incidents should be investigated and those responsible should be brought to justice. Excellencies, systemic racial discrimination extends beyond any expression of individual hatred. It results from bias in multiple systems and institutions of public policy, which separately and together perpetuate and reinforce barriers to equality. We need schools and universities that are free of bias, economies that give truly equal opportunities and fair treatment to all, political institutions that are more responsive and inclusive, justice systems which are truly just. The International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination and the Durban Declaration and Program Action are internationally agreed commitments to prohibit and combat racial discrimination in all spheres of civil, political, economic, social, and cultural life. They commit states to take targeted steps in law, in policy, and in practice to ensure full and equal rights to those who have faced discrimination in the past and today. The International Decade for People of African Descent, which is approaching its midterm review by the General Assembly, provides an important framework for taking action on structural issues of access to justice, racial profiling, recognition of people of African descent, and the deep-seated economic and development deficit which affect them. My office counts on reinvigorated support and action from states to accelerate this and other commitments to advance the human rights of people of African descent everywhere in laws, policies, and programs. It is especially important that people of African descent participate in shaping these decisions. Behind today's racial violence, systemic racism, and discriminatory policing lies the failure to acknowledge and confront the legacy of the slave trade and colonialism. To build a more solid foundation for equality, we need to better understand the scope of systemic discrimination with disaggregated data by ethnicity or race. Because when I met the group of experts of Afro descent, they will say in many countries they don't count us. And if they don't count us, we don't count. We also need to make amends for centuries of violence and discrimination, including through formal apologies, truth-telling processes, and reparation in various forms. I encourage this Council to heighten its focus on issues involving races and racial discrimination, and by giving more prominence to the important work of intergovernmental and expert mechanisms that address this issue. Specific and results-oriented recommendations, together with strong advocacy, should assist states to improve the visibility of national actions. In all of these measures, we should go beyond existing recommendations. We need to build on what has worked, from the enormous body of work and experience we already have. Time is of the essence. Patience has run out. Black lives matter. Indigenous lives matter. The life of people of color matter. All human beings are born equal in dignity and rights, and that is why this council, like my office, stands for. I thank the African Group of States for initiating this debate and this council for holding it. I trust it will be followed by swift and decisive reforms and decisions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam High Commissioner for Human Rights. And we now pass the floor to the Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission to deliver his statement. As I said, it comes from Addis Ababa. I hope it will work.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Okay. So he...
We can hear you, Madam.
The chairperson of the African Union welcomes the debate that we are having today. It's the Secretary General of the United Nations, Madam Chairperson of the Human Rights Council, distinguished ambassadors, brothers and sisters. We'd like to thank the African Group in Geneva for having inscribed on the agenda of this session the important and worrying issue of racial discrimination, human rights, deprivation of Africans and descendants of Africa. We welcome this debate. We want to congratulate you for having inscribed your agenda. We recall the resolution of the OAU on racial discrimination made by African head states at the OAU's first assembly in Cairo. The chairperson of the African Union Dr. Musa Faki Mahamat reaffirms the African Union's rejection of the continuing discriminatory practices against Black citizens of the United States. We believe that this systemic discrimination can only be eradicated if we examine the issues from the roots. We believe that this is an opportunity for the international community to examine the root causes of racial discrimination, and that means we must look at all this from the transatlantic slave trade and its consequences. This debate, therefore, is an idea whose time has come. However, sights of a Black man in London picking a a far-right member from Ham, tells us that deep down, all humanity is the same. We welcome this urgent debate today, and we urge that it does not become a frozen point in history. We must not allow racism, racial discrimination, and xenophobia to erase all the achievements and developments that humanity has achieved. We therefore urge the international community to intensify all efforts individually, collectively, nationally, continentally, to ensure the total elimination of all forms of discrimination based on race, ethnic or religious origin. This is our responsibility. It is the call of our times. I'd like to thank you for your kind attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And in accordance with past practice, special procedure mandate holders and the Coordinating Committee of Special Procedures will also provide an input to the urgent debate. We will now watch a video statement from Mrs. Tendai Akyume, who will speak as Special Rapporteur on contemporary forms of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance, and on behalf of the Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent. Her statement is also joined by the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Freedom of Peaceful Assembly and of Association and the Coordinating Committee of Special Procedures.
Madam President, distinguished delegates, it's a privilege to participate in this historic debate, and I deliver this statement in my own capacity as Special Rapporteur on contemporary forms of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance, and on behalf of the Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent. This statement is also joined by the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Freedom of Assembly and Association and the Coordination Committee of the UN Human Rights Special Procedures. The world is witnessing the largest ever transnational mobilization against systemic racism in law enforcement, sparked by the chilling images of the police killing of George Floyd. On May 25th, Derek Chauvin, a police officer in Minnesota, knelt on Mr. Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. While Mr. Floyd called out for help, 2 other officers helped hold him down, and another prevented bystanders from intervening. Among our jobs as independent experts appointed by the Human Rights Council is to sound the alarm in the face of grave human rights violations, and the situation in the United States has prompted us to do so. We refer you to the statement led by my mandate and joined by 47 special procedures mandate holders, which calls attention to the ongoing national uprising in the United States against systemic racism in law enforcement. We refer you to the statement led by the Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent and joined by other special procedures mandates that condemns what amounts to modern-day racial terror lynchings in the United States. We also refer you to recent special procedures statements led by the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Freedom of Peaceful Assembly and Association and by the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Opinion and Expression, condemning militarization of the police and the violent crackdown against peaceful protesters and journalists in the United States. The Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination has issued a statement under its early warning and urgent action procedures, raising alarm at the situation in the United States. Our collective analysis is that in the United States, the problem is not limited to specific enforcement practices or individual officers. It extends to the laws and the policies governing law enforcement. For people of African descent in the United States, the domestic system has utterly failed to acknowledge and confront racial injustice and discrimination. This injustice and discrimination is so deeply entrenched in law enforcement that even during this period of uprising, reports continue of extrajudicial killings of Black people by the police. This injustice and discrimination also affects other racial and ethnic minorities. And despite several decades of policing reform, executive intervention, and judicial oversight, this violence and racial injustice persists. Only a few days ago, Rayshard Brooks was shot and killed by police in Atlanta after he fell asleep in his car in the parking lot of a fast food restaurant. An important purpose of the UN human rights system and its international mechanisms is to ensure that where national authorities are unable or unwilling to protect human rights, those subject to violations have some means of recourse. The situation in the United States requires an international response that can help ensure that people of African descent in that country are no longer subject to routine but egregious violations that prompted this urgent debate in the first place. It's for this reason that any resolution adopted by the Human Rights Council at the conclusion of this debate must provide for an international commission of inquiry with the necessary authority to investigate systemic racism in law enforcement in the United States. Failure to do so would be to deny people of African descent in the United States the opportunity to draw on the global human rights system to challenge entrenched racial injustice. Failure to establish an international commission of inquiry would signal that Black lives do not matter, or that if they do, they don't matter enough to mobilize the Human Rights Council to intervene where it should. Equally important, the widespread and transnational nature of the protests we are seeing speak to the fact that systemic racism in law enforcement is also of urgent global concern. The massive transnational public outcry, including mobilization of people of all over the world, reflects their parallel, if not identical, local concerns with systemic racism in law enforcement. In our work, we found a common transnational thread in countries where racial injustice in law enforcement is most rampant, relating to failures to undo structures of racism originating in colonialism and the transatlantic slave trade. Systemic racism in law enforcement requires thematic engagement by the Council. For this reason, we strongly urge you to create a thematic commission of inquiry or other mechanism empowered to investigate systemic racism in law enforcement globally, especially where it is related to legacies of colonialism and transatlantic slavery. We believe the situation in the United States warrants urgent country-specific intervention and that a thematic global investigation is also in order. One cannot substitute for the other. We also wish to caution against a course of action that would rely on existing special procedures mandates to conduct an investigation into the issues that have led you to convene this debate. Both my mandate as Special Rapporteur and that of the Working Group are global, and you have tasked us with maintaining focus on the broad range of issues that arise under the umbrella of racial discrimination and intolerance. The issues before you today, systemic racism and law enforcement in the United States and in other parts of the world, cannot properly and fully be addressed if they are added to the long list of pressing responsibilities you've already assigned us. What's required today is the creation of commissions of inquiry or related mechanisms with the requisite resources to actually make a difference in the lives of the millions of people in the United States and around the world who are subject to systemic racism and law enforcement. Although our remarks have focused on systemic racism in law enforcement, we wish to highlight that the uprising in the United States and in other parts of the world are rejection of all systemic racism in all areas of life. As a result, this urgent debate is an important opportunity for members of the Council, the Secretary General, the High Commissioner on Human Rights, to recommit to supporting the different mechanisms and processes within the United Nations that have been established for the purposes of challenging systemic racism. The truth is, there's been a steady erosion within the United Nations of commitment to the anti-racism human rights framework, including to the historic commitments to combat structural forms of discrimination and intolerance that were made at the World Conference Against Racism in Durban in 2001. We need to see concrete changes on this front. We would like to conclude where we began. What is at stake here is the lives and lived experiences of human beings who deserve fundamental human rights protections and who should not be denied these rights on the basis of the color of their skin. Due to the time difference, I'm recording the statement on June 16, 2020. On June 16, 1976, thousands of Black students in South Africa took to the streets to protest apartheid in what we now call the Soweto Uprising. Many of you are likely familiar with the image of Hector Peterson, one of the children shot and killed by apartheid police during those protests. What does it mean that almost 50 years later, in the United States, people have to take to the streets to demand justice for Breonna Taylor? Breonna Taylor is the 26-year-old Black woman who was shot and killed by police in her own home in Louisville, Kentucky, in March this year. Using a no-knock warrant, police entered her home and shot her to death. The officers involved have not been charged with any crimes, nor have they been dismissed from employment. They're on administrative leave. The family members of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Philando Castile, and Michael Brown have turned to this body for help, They've joined others in calling for an international commission of inquiry for the situation in the United States. We are aware that some member states have argued that a commission of inquiry should be reserved for more serious human rights violations. We disagree. I repeat, we disagree. If the national and global uprisings we are witnessing are not sufficient evidence of the gravity of the issues before you, it's difficult to imagine what it would take to convince you that the situation we are facing is very serious. It's difficult to imagine what might convince you to demonstrate the equal worth of people of African descent. The decisions this Council will take in the context of this urgent debate will undoubtedly find their way into the history books, and we urge you to ensure that those decisions place this body on the right side of history. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. And we now hear a video message from Mr. Philonise Floyd, the brother of Mr. George Floyd.
My name is Philonise Floyd, and I am the brother of George Floyd. On May 25th, 2020, my brother was tortured and murdered by 4 police officers in Minneapolis, Minnesota, in the United States. I thank you for holding this urgent meeting for the opportunity to speak to you today. My brother was unarmed and was accused of passing a counterfeit $20 bill. The entire incident showed my brother murdered was captured on camera. My family and I had to watch the last moments of his life when he was tortured to death, including the 8 minutes and 46 seconds one officer kept his knee on my brother's neck. My brother begged the officer for his life, cried out for our mama, who was already dead, and said over and over again, "I can't breathe." Even after my brother was unconscious, stopped moving, and stopped breathing, the officer kept his knee on my brother's neck for another 4 minutes, as many witnessed him begging the officer to take his knee off my brother's neck and save his life. The officer showed no mercy, no humanity, and tortured my brother to death in the middle of the street in Minneapolis, with a crowd of witnesses watching and begging them to stop showing us black people the same lesson yet again: black lives do not matter in the United States of America. None of the police officers were fired for murdering my brother until masses of people in the United States and around the world protested the injustice. When people dared to raise their voice and protest for my brother, they were tear gassed, run over with police vehicles. Several people lost eyes and suffered brain damage to rubber bullets. Peaceful protesters were shot and killed by police. Journalists were beaten and blinded when they tried to show the world the brutality happening at the protests. When people raise their voices to protest the treatment of black people in America, they are silenced, they are shot and killed. My brother George Floyd is one of the many black men and women that have been murdered by police in recent years. The sad truth is that the case is not unique. The way you saw my brother tortured and murdered on camera is the way black people are treated by police in America. You watched my brother die. That could have been me. I am my brother's keeper. You in the United Nations are your brothers and sisters keepers in America. And you have the power to help us get justice for my brother George Floyd. I'm asking you to help him. I'm asking you to help me. I'm asking you to help us, black people in America. I hope that you would consider establishing an independent commission of inquiry to investigate police killings of black people in America and the violence used against peaceful protesters.
Thank you very much. And I now turn to the list of speakers. We start with the Central African Republic, please.
Merci. Madame la Présidente, Madame la Haut-Commissaire, Excellences, chers collègues, je prends la parole en ma qualité de doyen des ambassadeurs du groupe africain. Madame la Présidente, le groupe africain remercie les membres du Conseil d'avoir consenti à la demande d'un débat urgent pour discuter des violations des droits de l'homme d'inspiration raciale, du racisme systémique, de la brutalité policière et de la violence contre les manifestations pacifiques. Le groupe africain salue l'adhésion de tous les États à cette question qui mérite l'attention urgente du Conseil des droits de l'homme. Le groupe africain exprime ici également sa sincère gratitude au bureau et au secrétariat de notre Conseil d'avoir pris les dispositions nécessaires pour la tenue de ces débats urgents aujourd'hui, et ce, conformément à la demande du groupe africain. Madame la Présidente, le groupe africain est profondément préoccupé par les incidents récurrents d'homicides raciaux, de brutalité policière et de violations récurrentes de droits de l'homme à l'encontre des personnes d'ascendance africaine dans certaines parties du monde. Le groupe africain condamne fermement le meurtre insensé et injustifié de George Floyd. C'est ici l'occasion pour le groupe africain de noter que de nombreuses recommandations ont été émises au fil des ans par divers organes conventionnels tels que le Comité contre la torture et le Comité pour l'élimination de la discrimination raciale pour que les États, tous les États, sans distinction aucune, prennent des mesures coercitives pour répondre aux préoccupations concernant la brutalité et le recours excessif à la force par leur personnel chargé de l'application des lois, ainsi que les nombreuses allégations de mauvais traitements infligés à des personnes d'ascendance africaine. Certaines de ces recommandations remontent d'ailleurs à 2006 et ont été répétées à maintes reprises. Le groupe africain espère donc sincèrement que les messages et les résultats de ce débat urgent aujourd'hui inciteront les pays où ces incidents se produisent à prendre des mesures correctives pour répondre à nos préoccupations collectives concernant les violations des droits de l'homme d'inspiration raciale systémique, le racisme, la brutalité policière et la violence contre les manifestations pacifiques. Nous espérons en outre que ce débat urgent renouvellera notre engagement en tant qu'État membre à mettre pleinement en œuvre la déclaration et le plan d'action de Durban. Il est inacceptable que nous devions encore négocier et lutter pour l'égalité des droits de certaines personnes 72 ans après l'adoption de la Déclaration universelle des droits de l'homme qui proclame que toutes les personnes naissent libres et égaux en dignité. Pour terminer, Madame la Présidente, le groupe africain condamne avec force le racisme systémique ou non systémique, quelle que soit sa forme et le lieu où il se manifeste. Tous les pays, sans distinction aucune, sont tenus au strict respect des droits humains. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur. And I now give the floor to Indonesia on behalf of a group of countries.
Madam President, thank you very much. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the core state of the Convention Against Torture Initiative, CTI, namely Chile, Denmark, Fiji, Ghana, Morocco, and my own country, Indonesia. Police and other law enforcement actors in all our society play an incredibly important role so that the ordinary citizen can go about their daily lives without fear. Integrity is the fundamental for them to be able to perform their functions safely and effectively, and without it, the social contract is fractured. Yet, regrettably, complaints of police overreach, corruption, and violence are still too common, the consequences of which can be catastrophic and widely and deeply felt. Studies show consistently that vulnerable and marginalized people and communities are at greater risk of being unfairly treated within justice system. CTI has been working tirelessly by facilitating exchanges, sharing good practices, and advising on positive police standards. We know that law enforcement need to be well-trained and professional, and we know they need clear and transparent rules, ethnic and gender diverse recruitment and promotion procedure, and independent accountability mechanisms. The CTI stand ready to respond to global calls for the reimagining of law enforcement. That is why today we call upon all member states and police chiefs worldwide to pledge zero tolerance of racism and discrimination, and to review and adjust, whenever needed, laws, policies, procedure, and practices to be people-centered and prevention-oriented. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And I pass the floor to Azerbaijan on behalf of the NAM.
Thank you, Madam President. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the member states of the non-aligned movement. At the outset, we would like to express our appreciation for holding this urgent debate in a time when racially inspired human rights violations, systemic racism, racially motivated police violence are on the rise around the world. The NAM has historically maintained an unequivocal and principled position against all forms of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and any kind of related intolerance. Today, again, the NAM condemns all forms of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance, and expresses serious concern on the resurgence of contemporary forms of such abhorrent crimes in the various parts of the world, which constitute serious violations of human rights and fundamental freedoms, as well as impede equal opportunities. Madam President, we seize this opportunity also to express our concern about the increased use of mass media to promote and disseminate racism, racial hatred, xenophobia, racial discrimination, and related intolerance. And in this regard, we call on all member states to devote the highest priority to educational programs that promote dialogue and tolerance among communities in order to curb the scourge of hate speech. Moreover, international cooperation and initiatives that help promoting mutual understanding between communities shall be encouraged and strengthened. To conclude, the NAM emphasizes the need to address with greater resolve and political will all forms of manifestations of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance in all spheres of life and in all parts of the world. In this regard, the NAM reiterates its call on all states to fully and effectively implement the Durban Declaration and Programme of Action and the outcome document of the Durban Review Conference. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker now is Croatia on behalf of the European Union.
Thank you, Madam President. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union. The Republic of North Macedonia, Montenegro, Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Liechtenstein, Ukraine, and Armenia aligned themselves with this statement. The European Union expresses its deepest sympathy to the family and friends of George Floyd. We were saddened by his tragic death while in police custody. The European Union also expresses its deepest sympathy to the families and friends of all other victims of racism and police brutality in the world. The African Group has called for an urgent debate during the 43rd session of the Human Rights Council on the current racially inspired human rights violations, systemic racism, police brutality, and the violence against peaceful protest. The EU supports the African Group and the calls from civil society and relatives of victims for the need to discuss these matters at the Human Rights Council. Incidents of racially motivated violence and hatred take place in all regions of the world, and we need to look into our own souls. This demonstrates that there is a continuous need to step up our efforts and actions to prevent hate crimes, discrimination, racism, xenophobia, and related intolerance. The EU is determined to put an end to such hate crimes. Racial discrimination runs against the values and principles of the European Union, universal human rights and fundamental freedoms. It will never be tolerated. All societies must remain vigilant against the excessive use of force and ensure that all such situations are addressed safely, effectively, and in full respect for the rule of law and human rights. The EU will continue calling on all states to uphold the rights to participate in public affairs, freedom of peaceful assembly and association, including for human rights defenders and peaceful protesters, as well as freedom of opinion and expression online and offline, with particular emphasis on the safety of journalists, journalists, bloggers, and other media workers. We believe that it is the time to unite in a firm global collective response, which leaves no room for complacency and requires political leadership and strict enforcement of legal commitments. Also, public policies aimed at fostering a domestic environment of tolerance, respect, and peace should be strengthened. The European Union would like to reiterate our unwavering commitment to fighting racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and all other forms of intolerance all over the world, ensuring that all human beings are free and equal in dignity and rights, as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights proclaims. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And I now give the floor to Mexico on behalf of a group of countries.
Gracias. Tengo el honor de presentar esta declaración en nombre de Argentina, Costa Rica, Chile, Colombia, Guatemala, Panamá, Perú, Honduras, Uruguay y México. Observamos con gran preocupación los efectos del racismo estructural y sistémico en los individuos y las sociedades. Debemos adoptar medidas serias para combatir los estereotipos y prejuicios arraigados en las esferas pública y privada y que están afectando a personas pertenecientes a minorías en todo el mundo. Los Estados y las organizaciones de la sociedad civil debemos unir esfuerzos y canalizar energías para abordar las causas estructurales que subyacen a las desigualdades y la estigmatización. Hacemos un llamado a los Estados para que tengan en cuenta la importancia de la Declaración y Programa de Acción de Durban y adopten estrategias multidimensionales que propicien cambios sociales, políticos e institucionales genuinos en materia de igualdad y no discriminación. Estas acciones deben abarcar campañas de concientización y revisiones exhaustivas de políticas y regulaciones para garantizar que éstas cumplan con las respectivas obligaciones internacionales de derechos humanos. Los Estados tienen la responsabilidad primaria de prevenir actos violentos y crímenes motivados por el racismo, la xenofobia y la intolerancia, y de garantizar el acceso a la justicia y la rendición de cuentas en caso de que ocurran. Es crucial erradicar toda práctica no alineada a los derechos humanos, como el abuso policial, el uso excesivo de la fuerza y el perfilamiento racial, entre otras. También es vital reforzar el diálogo con la sociedad civil. Como señaló la alta comisionada, se necesitan reformas de gran alcance y un diálogo inclusivo para romper el ciclo de impunidad en casos de homicidios perpetrados por agentes de la policía y los sesgos raciales en las políticas. Cierro la cita. Este diálogo debe tener como objetivo evitar cualquier tipo de violencia y crimen enraizado en cualquier forma de racismo y xenofobia. Igualmente, los Estados debemos adoptar medidas necesarias para erradicar el discurso de odio y las ideologías de supremacía racial. La pandemia del COVID-19 ha mostrado cuán relevantes son la solidaridad y la unidad. Como declaró el secretario general, el racismo es el rechazo de nuestra humanidad común, aspecto central de la Carta de las Naciones Unidas y de nuestros valores fundamentales. Por ello, debemos reflejar los principios de dignidad humana, igualdad sustantiva y no discriminación en todas nuestras acciones. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, embajadora. The next speaker is Marshall Islands.
Madam President, Excellencies, the Republic of the Marshall Islands joins others who have spoken today in grave concern over the persistence of systemic racial discrimination throughout the world. Any measure of state-sponsored violence, retribution for peaceful defenders who speak out for human rights and against discrimination runs against the very grain of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. If this institution cannot speak at a time when so many people have demanded answers, then we, as the United Nations, would risk irrelevance. While the Marshall Islands is one of the newest members of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, we are struggling over our own history of discrimination, from our colonial past, from our nuclear legacy to climate change. On this last point, we would like to remind the Council of the intersectionality between racism and climate change. We are on the front line and are the first ones to suffer. It is also clear to us that the issues are not effectively addressed by distant multilateral outcomes, but by the political will and social change necessary to implement. We, like others, remain frustrated when every step forward becomes a step backward. This is why we are sympathetic to calls from civil society actors to have this Council expose racial discrimination and end it. This struggle is this Council's struggle. their struggle is this council's struggle. There have been too many other instances around the world of peaceful protests disrupted, people injured, and too many instances where political and social systems enforce the placement of one race, ethnicity, or creed above others. And this is why we are not sympathetic to the political exploitation of racial discrimination. The challenge remains upon nations to think closely and carefully on effective and meaningful responses to systemic racial discrimination, but also to foster the necessary will to achieve what has been long promised. Thank you, and Komoldada.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. The next speaker is India.
Madam President, my delegation thanks the African Group for highlighting this issue before the Council. We join other delegations in firmly and unequivocally rejecting all forms of racism and all acts of racially motivated discrimination and violence. Madam President, India's commitment to combat racism and racial discrimination predates our emergence as an independent state. From highlighting the evil of apartheid at the UN in 1946 to the establishment 40 years later of the Africa Fund, we have opposed the dehumanizing effect of imperialism, colonialism, and racial discrimination. We joined other emerging nations in the struggle against these scourges of our times, participating fully in the World Conference Against Racism in 2001 in Durban, South Africa. Madam President, Mahatma Gandhi exhorted us to be the change we wish to see in the world. And so our Constitution was amongst the first to stand against racial discrimination. Our Constitution has enhanced our resolve to always stand with the cause of equality, justice, and non-racialism. Regrettably, even though the high tide of imperialism and colonialism have ebbed, and even though our world is smaller, closer, and more coherent than ever before, we are still not free from the old habits of discrimination, prejudice, and hostility. People still labor under the weight of ingrained discrimination, which imposes economic and social costs and treat some of humanity as less worthy. Racists still find space for their abhorrent views. In the 21st century, it is a matter of outrage that there is still resistance to such change. Madam President, creating a more fair, more equitable, and gentler society of the future remains the lodestar of social progress. We stand with every right-thinking country in the world enacting locally, regionally, and globally to truly eliminate racial discrimination by anyone against anyone. The effective implementation of the Durban Declaration and Programme of Action, an outcome document of the Durban Review Conference, is an important step towards combating racism. Indeed, its objectives must be implemented in law and in practice. We must all take robust and comprehensive steps, both as governments and as individuals, to raise awareness of diversity and to show zero tolerance of racism. And we must not hesitate to take strict action against those who incite and perpetrate racially motivated violence. Madam President, I assure you of India's steadfast commitment to eliminating the scourge of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Tiene la palabra Venezuela.
Señora Presidenta, saludamos con viva emoción este debate urgente solicitado por el Grupo Africano. África hoy ha sido un faro de libertad en el mundo. De su suelo han emergido las voces de Nelson Mandela, Patricio Lumumba, Thomas Sankara, Cheikh Anta Diop, Gamal Abdel Nasser, Leopold Sédar Senghor, Kwame Nkrumah. El vil asesinato de George Floyd ha desnudado el racismo sistémico y la naturaleza fascista y supremacista del imperialismo yanqui. El racismo es inminente del imperialismo, el hijo predilecto del capitalismo salvaje que hoy impera en Estados Unidos. El racismo es hijo del esclavismo y del colonialismo. Donald Trump es imperialista, por lo tanto racista. Trump es una amenaza a la paz mundial, heredero predilecto de la secta de extrema derecha Ku Klux Klan. Por eso amenaza con aplicar a los millones de manifestantes en Estados Unidos la ley de insurrección del 3 de marzo de 1807. Esta ley ha servido en el pasado para masacrar a afrodescendientes. En una abominable declaración recogida por el New York Times el 30 de mayo de 2020, Trump amenazó a los manifestantes que se encontraban en las proximidades de la Casa Blanca con lanzarles los perros más viciosos y utilizar las armas más siniestras que jamás he visto. El famoso lingüista y politólogo estadounidense Noam Chomsky afirmó el 7 de junio de 2020 en una entrevista por el medio digital Medio y Acción, y cito: Trump es el presidente más criminal que jamás haya habitado el planeta Tierra. El más agresivo adversario del multilateralismo en el mundo es también Donald Trump. Por eso Estados Unidos abandonó el Consejo de Derechos Humanos, retiró el apoyo a la Organización Mundial de la Salud, sancionó a honorables magistrados de la Corte Penal Internacional y apoya los planes de agresión militar foránea en contra del gobierno bolivariano de Nicolás Maduro. Las protestas antirraciales en Estados Unidos tienen un carácter multiétnico. Estas protestas se han reproducido en el mundo, lo cual demuestra que las ansias de justicia, libertad e igualdad son patrimonio universal del ser humano. Venezuela ha expresado su total apoyo al proyecto de resolución presentado por el Grupo Africano con ocasión de este debate urgente, el cual cuenta con nuestro copatrocinio. En esta reunión antirracista queremos recordar las palabras de Martin Luther King. La humanidad no puede continuar trágicamente atada en la noche sin estrellas del racismo y de la guerra. Y a Nelson Mandela, quien proclamó: nadie nace odiando a otra persona por el color de su piel o su origen o su religión. Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker is Brazil.
Madam President, racism is a beast and a scourge. It has no place in our world today. It is our duty to speak out against it. I hope we can do it in a way that unites us rather than further divide our world already so polarized. Madam President, Brazil would like to once again reiterate its unwavering support to the fight against racism and related contemporary forms of racial discrimination at national and international levels. Racism is not exclusive to any region in particular. It is a scourge deeply rooted in many parts of the world, affecting a large portion of mankind. No country should be singled out in this respect. Racial discrimination in police actions must not be tolerated anywhere on earth. Admitting that truth should provide us with a sound basis for needed improvement. Raising awareness is just as important as acknowledging the indispensable role of police forces in ensuring public safety and protecting the right to a peaceful and safe existence, the right to life itself. We face difficult times, Madam President. The COVID-19 pandemic has proven to be a catalyst to the aggravation of the many underlying conditions that negatively affect the promotion and protection of human rights. Racism is one of them. The response to the Brazilian government to the pandemic comprises measures aimed at benefiting the country's whole population in order to avoid any kind of racial discrimination. Our countries have the responsibility to make every effort to combat discrimination and promote equality. The human rights system offers the means to do so in a coordinated manner. The DDPA plays a key role among the many international commitments, and many are the mechanisms to support its implementation. At a minimum, we should support their work and provide them guidance that leads to outcomes that are fit for purpose. Brazil remains, Madam President, open to engage constructively in this timely debate in order to strengthen our national policies and our international commitments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And the next speaker is Pakistan.
Madam President, let me begin by offering our sincere condolences and sympathies to the family of Mr. George Floyd. There can be no justification for racism in any form, manifestation, basis, or justification. Even as Mr. Floyd's death has amplified wide-ranging outrage, his death is neither an isolated incident nor confined to one country. In many countries, people of African descent continue to face systematic racism and racial discrimination. The Durban Declaration and Programme of Action, as well as the International Convention on Elimination of Racial Discrimination, represent a global framework at the disposal of this Council to address this scourge. They offer a clear roadmap for human rights-based reorientation of public and law enforcement professionals and correctional services. Pakistan reiterates its full support to an effective implementation of Durban Declaration and Programme of Action, as well as the Convention on Elimination of Racial Discrimination. We appreciate the initiative taken by the African Group for this debate. We support the group's position to criminalize all contemporary forms of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance through the platform of Ad Hoc Committee on the Elaboration of Complementary Standards. We also reaffirm our support for this Council's focus on this important contemporary subject. Finally, the unfortunate tragedy of Mr. Floyd is both a reminder and a wake-up call to demonstrate political will, to hold those responsible to account, and take measurable actions against systemic racism at the policy and institutional level. Let actions speak louder than words. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. The next speaker is the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Madam President. The Republic of Korea supports the convening of this urgent debate in the view that the international community should work together to overcome global challenges including racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and intolerance throughout the world. My delegation is deeply concerned that racial discrimination persists around the world. Given that such a phenomenon is a universal human rights issue by nature, the Council should strongly address all types of racial discrimination regardless of state or race. Today's discussion is timely and relevant as the COVID-19 crisis has exposed and magnified existing racial and ethnic disparities in our society. We are concerned by the reports that racial and ethnic minorities, such as Asians in certain foreign countries, face a surge in xenophobic violence and discrimination related to the pandemic. In this regard, we underline the importance of international cooperation among various stakeholders, including governments, international organizations, civil society, media, and businesses. This is crucial not only to defeat the virus, but also to effectively combat discrimination and violence based on race and ethnicity during the epidemic. Also, we firmly believe that the right to freedom of peaceful assembly needs to be protected in accordance with international human rights standards. In this regard, we support in the meantime, we support the call by High Commissioner that it is important to ensure that protests remain peaceful without violence and destruction of property. Madam President, my delegation notes that the African group has circulated the second draft resolution. We were of the view that the establishing a new COI mechanism on the first draft was questionable, as the operation of a COI is feasible only when there is a serious and systematic violation of international human rights law, and at the same time, when it is clear that the state government or the judicial system cannot or is not willing to address such violations. We still found the second draft somewhat inadequate since it mainly focuses on racial discrimination problems of certain states and groups of people. In conclusion, as we approach the 20th anniversary of the Durban Declaration and Program of Action next year, my delegation wishes to reiterate that the Republic of Korea stands ready to work with the international community to combat all forms of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much. Tiene la palabra Uruguay.
Señora Presidenta, Uruguay agradece al Grupo Africano por la iniciativa de celebrar este debate y en particular nos complace que este haya sido convocado por consenso. Uruguay extiende sus sinceras condolencias a los familiares de todas las víctimas del racismo, la violencia policial y la impunidad en todo el mundo y en particular a los familiares de George Floyd que se han expresado ante esta reunión. Al igual que ahora, a lo largo de la historia, las manifestaciones pacíficas han demostrado tener una importancia fundamental para reivindicar la igualdad y para avanzar en la protección de los derechos de la población afrodescendiente. En tal sentido, Uruguay reivindica la importancia del estricto respeto de los derechos de libertad de expresión y asociación pacífica y rinde homenaje a la labor de la sociedad civil y a los defensores de derechos humanos que trabajan en todo el mundo para poner fin al flagelo del racismo. Tal como ha sido reconocido por la Comisión Interamericana de Derechos Humanos, la abolición de la esclavitud no acabó con la estigmatización y el trato excluyente hacia las personas afrodescendientes. Desde la adopción de la Declaración Universal de Derechos Humanos hace más de 70 años, la comunidad internacional ha adoptado múltiples instrumentos y otros compromisos sobre este tema y ciertamente se han registrado avances. Sin embargo, reconocemos que las medidas positivas adoptadas para superar las causas profundas de la discriminación estructural no han resultado suficientes para poner fin a las prácticas racistas y a las doctrinas de superioridad racial, las que continúan presentes en numerosas partes del mundo. En particular, nos preocupa que el racismo aún esté presente en instituciones del Estado, lo que queda en evidencia cuando somos testigos de la aplicación de perfiles raciales y de asesinatos de personas afrodescendientes a manos de los propios agentes del Estado. La violencia policial motivada por la discriminación racial es injustificable, así como también lo es la impunidad que prevalece en muchos países respecto a esta clase de delitos y que es reflejo de una discriminación histórica y estructural basada en el origen étnico-racial de las personas. Señora Presidenta, a juicio de Uruguay, estos acontecimientos deben ser un llamado de atención para fortalecer las políticas nacionales destinadas a erradicar de nuestras sociedades y las estructuras del Estado el racismo y toda otra forma conexa de intolerancia y discriminación. Alentamos a fortalecer el diálogo con las comunidades afrodescendientes y las organizaciones de la sociedad civil para avanzar en ese objetivo. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, embajador. And I now pass the floor to the Netherlands.
Madam President, the Kingdom of the Netherlands aligns itself with the EU statement. It is this Council's mandate and duty to respond to all human rights challenges and violations, and we welcome the consensus around today's urgent debate. The tragic death of Mr. George Floyd brings us here today, but let us recognize that racism is a global issue and that we are not here to talk about one country. 75 years ago, the founders of the United Nations identified the need to counter racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and all other forms of intolerance around the world. Racism was unacceptable then, and it is unacceptable now. Progress has been made worldwide, but there is still much work to be done, not only in the United States, but all over the world. Because patterns of discrimination continue to drive conflict and racism exacerbates the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic. The Council cannot ignore the call of many peaceful protesters around the world, and journalists covering racism and peaceful protests must be free to report without facing violence, arrest or intimidation. The role of a free press must be safeguarded at all times. States that have invested in robust rule of law are much better placed to ensure that incidents regarding possible human rights abuses, including those involving journalists, are investigated and, where necessary, prosecuted. The Netherlands has full confidence in the rule of law in the United States of America and its democratic institutions to effectively deal with these important issues. At the same time, the protests compel us to look critically at our own record and challenges. In the Netherlands, we have adjusted our legal system to the obligations of the CERD and other binding treaty provisions. We have accepted the individual complaints procedure. We have created a national watchdog to bring out racism cases into the political remit. Last year, we received a special rapporteur on racism to discuss our national policies and challenges. We recognize that we too still have work to do. So the work we can do together at the international level continues, and we must come together as United Human Rights Council and recommit ourselves to the rule of law. Let us refrain from creating a new mechanism, but be accountable within the existing framework. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And we now hear from the Philippines. I think they're absent, so we turn to Armenia.
Thank you, Madam President. The developments that have unfolded since May 25th demonstrated that there is an untapped potential uniting the humanity. People who went out to protest racism and violence in expressing their solidarity with the people of African descent were not driven by the color of skin, but rather with compassion, acute need for justice, and acknowledged the suffering of people. People took advantage of existing constitutional framework in many countries around the globe to claim their rights. Armenia strongly believes that peaceful protest and non-violent debate are the right avenues leading towards prevention and redress. We need to pose the question pertaining to the persistence of racial discrimination. It is our duty to address it, since it affects millions of people around the globe, making them victims of routine everyday violence. Racially inspired human rights violations manifest themselves in police brutality worldwide. The challenges, however, are not limited to the law enforcement injustice. Those risks are vivid in disparities in such crucial areas as employment, education, healthcare, and housing. These are factors that create vicious circles that disrupt the cohesion and very fabric of a society and exacerbate existing inequalities, making people hopeless captives of the divides that separate them from the better off. Such alienation contributes to entrenched incapacitation and dispossession that boosts criminality and violence. Effective policies of integration that reject discrimination and segregation should especially be pursued in societies that are home for racially mixed populations. That is our conviction that the police services should be the models of such a conduct. Madam President, no selective and objective approach has to be enrooted while considering the human rights situations worldwide. In this context, it is deplorable that gross human rights violations perpetrated by some authoritarian regimes go unrecorded and stay without timely and adequate reaction by the international community. As an HRC member, Armenia is committed to bring such situations requiring due response to the attention of this Council. This is also a matter of strengthening the institutional capabilities of this body. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And I wanted to point out that we have now closed the list of speakers. And having said that, I give back the floor to the Ambassador of Indonesia.
Thank you, Madam President. Indonesia is alarmed at the surge of racial hatred and hate crimes that has incited discrimination and violence in many parts of the world. As a third state party, Indonesia remains committed to take affirmative steps to eliminate racial discrimination in all levels of society and governance. Police and other law enforcement agencies are key actors in ensuring the safety and security of our own people. Therefore, we should continue efforts to improve the undertaking of law enforcement activities amid current challenges. In this context, the inclusion of human rights education and training into the curriculum of police and armed forces academies are central to prevent and curtail human rights violations. Indonesia, together with the core state of CTI, has been organizing workshops and training programs on positive policing standards. Furthermore, the involvement of national human rights institutions and other relevant national institutions should also be advocated. We have to take stern action against all forms of racial violence. At the same time, concise efforts should be taken to further ensure accountability as well as full and unrestricted access to due process of law for all. Indeed, this urgent debate renews our commitment to the equality, dignity, and rights of all human beings. Indonesia stands ready to work together with all states in efforts to eradicate racism, racial discrimination, and racial violence once and for all. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And we now pass to Australia.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Australia thanks the Africa Group for bringing forward such an important issue. Australia supports all efforts to address and eliminate racial discrimination in all its forms, wherever it occurs. The violence, brutality, and racial discrimination to which Africans and people of African descent have been subjected around the world is deplorable and must end. We deplore the tragic death of George Floyd, and we support the United States' recent steps to address racism, police brutality, and violent responses to peaceful demonstrations. We note, for example, the charging of officers over George Floyd's death, the removal of others responsible for excessive force, as well as moves toward police reform. The United States is an open, liberal democracy governed by the rule of law, and we have confidence in their transparent justice systems to address these issues appropriately. Sadly, no country can claim to have eradicated racism. We all must do more to end the impunity too many perpetrators enjoy in many parts of the world. Open and transparent democracies are well placed to tackle such issues. We have long supported the right of all peoples to safe, peaceful protest and freedom of speech. Wherever protests might take place, we urge all those involved, be they from government, police or protesters, to exercise restraint and avoid violence. In Australia, we have seen large numbers of Australians support action to address racial inequality. Australia rejects racism and xenophobia in all its forms, and we are proud of our diverse and cohesive society. We remain strongly committed to combating racism and upholding the rule of law, including through action by this Council and its mechanisms. I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. And the next speaker is Namibia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is then a brief version of Namibia's statement. The full version will be uploaded. Namibia aligns itself with the statements delivered on behalf of the Africa Group and NAM. We thank you, Madam President, for allowing this very crucial discussion to take place within the Council during the time when the world is rising up to once again call for meaningful and lasting action to eliminate racial discrimination with police brutality perpetrated against people from African descent, being a manifestation thereof. Madam President, in the year 2020, and with international laws and norms in place, we should not have to remind states of their obligations to eliminate and preventing racial discrimination against all persons, and especially people of African descent. The systemic and even perceived racial discrimination practices across the world requires concerted efforts towards total elimination. National laws and policies need to be intentionally streamlined with human rights obligations and the full implementation of the Durban Declaration and Plan of Action. We have developed the tools over the years. We must do better as states, utilizing these tools to protect the rights of all persons and to live up to the letter of the UDHR that all persons are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Given our history, Namibia seriously and utterly condemns the recent surge of racially charged killings, police brutality, and palpable human rights violations happening in the United States of America and other parts of the world. In view of the general challenges faced by the people of African descent across the world, we remain steadfast in our pursuit to demand real concrete action targeted towards the total elimination of racism, racial discrimination, and related intolerances globally. Therefore, Madam President, Namibia calls upon all states to fully implement legislation and other measures already in place to ensure the elimination of all forms of racism, xenophobia, and related intolerance, as well as police brutality, notably against people of African descent. I thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ambassador. I now pass the floor to Nepal.
Madam President, Nepal aligns with the statement delivered by NAM Chair. Nepal supports the African Group initiative for holding the urgent debate. Nepal commends Council's timely attention to urgent issues of human rights violations around the world. We all cherish all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. We underscore the importance of addressing intolerance and injustice so as to realize a world of well-being that truly leaves no one behind. We are concerned with the rise in negative stereotyping and racial harassment. The role of administrative machinery, including the law enforcement and community organization, is vital in fostering a culture of tolerance and respect for diversity. Madam President, Nepal played an active role at the United Nations Special Committee Against Apartheid as a member for 4 years since its inception, and later as its vice chair for 25 years until the committee's termination in 1994. We emphasized the effective follow-up and implementation of the Durban Declaration and Program of Action, as well as of the International Decade for People of African Descent 2015 to 2024. We appreciate the High Commissioner for her efforts to promote and protect human rights worldwide. We also appreciate the contribution of the Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent in highlighting persisting challenges in the elimination of racial discrimination and proposing measures for improving their human rights situation. Madam President, international community must work together to create a condition in which each individual society and state can live in peace and dignity without any fear, intimidation, or stigmatization. Nepal's constitution embraces the principles of non-discrimination, inclusive democracy, equality, and social justice. Our laws criminalize racial discrimination. Engaging in dialogue and addressing specific needs of marginalized community is crucial to promote social integration and justice and ensure equality and non-discrimination. I thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. May I encourage all delegations to respect the time limit, please? We have a long list of speakers. Ceci dit, je donne la parole au Cameroun.
Merci Madame la Présidente. Le Cameroun s'associe aux déclarations du groupe africain et du mouvement des non-alignés. Le meurtre de George Floyd confirme que les Africains et les personnes d'ascendance africaine demeurent des victimes d'un racisme systémique, des abus et autres violations du droit international des droits de l'homme dans différentes parties du monde. Comme autre illustration de cette dramatique réalité, outre l'affaire Adama Traoré, il y a le cas de notre compatriote Josiane Ngo qui a été violentée impunément par la police à Château-Rouge alors qu'elle était enceinte de 8 mois. Les organes de défense des droits humains des Nations Unies et Amnesty International affirment, dans plusieurs de leurs rapports, que la dimension raciste est évidente dans ces mauvais traitements et autres violations des droits humains. Ces organes des Nations Unies et Amnesty International allèguent même de l'existence d'un racisme institutionnalisé au sein des organes chargés de l'application des lois dans les pays incriminés. Au demeurant, les recherches menées par Amnesty International démontrent l'existence de graves faiblesses et défaillances dans le système actuel d'enquête sur les plaintes pour violation des droits humains imputées à des agents de la force publique dans ces États. Il est donc opportun de réformer les dispositifs actuels. Entre autres, il pourrait être envisagé une implication plus active des titulaires de mandats dédiés au titre des procédures spéciales du Conseil des droits de l'homme. Continuer à traiter ce fléau par le déni ou une arrogance républicaine se traduira fatalement par la dilution des ambitions messianiques affichées par ces pays, car se vouloir une autorité morale en matière de droits de l'homme infère un devoir d'exemplarité de la part des 10 États. Black Lives Matter. Je vous remercie de votre aimable attention.
Merci beaucoup. And the next speaker is Bahrain.
شكرا السيدة الرئيسة. على الرغم من نجاح البشرية من بناء منظومة متكاملة من البنية القانونية والمؤسساتية في مجال حماية وتعزيز حقوق الإنسان وصون كرامته وحرياته الأساسية واعتبار ذلك أساسا للسلام والعدل في العالم، إلا أننا وللأسف لا نزال نشهد في عصرنا الحاضر تصاعدا ملفتا لأساليب متنوعة من الممارسات التمييزية والعنصرية تضرب العديد من المجتمعات نظرا لغياب ثقافة التفاهم والتسامح وقبول الآخر واحترام خصوصياته الثقافية والدينية. وبالتالي فإننا مطالبون اليوم أكثر من أي وقت مضى لعقد مثل هذا النقاش العاجل من أجل الوقوف على جذور هذه المعضلة وأسبابها الحقيقية والتعامل معها بشكل شامل وحازم. السيدة الرئيسة، إن مملكة البحرين وانطلاقا من رؤية حضرة صاحب الجلالة ملك البلاد المفدى حفظه الله ورعاه المرتكزة على أسس التسامح والتعايش قد تبنت العديد من المبادرات الوطنية والدولية الهادفة إلى نشر ثقافة المساواة والتعايش السلمي ونبذ العنف والكراهية والعنصرية. ومن أهم هذه المبادرات إنشاء مركز الملك حمد العالمي للحوار بين الأديان والتعايش السلمي، والذي يهدف إلى إبراز منظومة القيم الجامعة بين الحضارات والثقافات والتعريف بها، والعمل على إثراء مسيرة التسامح والتعايش السلمي ومكافحة الفكر المتطرف والمغذي للعنف والعنصرية والكراهية والإرهاب، الأمر الذي جعل من مملكة البحرين نموذجا متميزا في مجال التعايش السلمي والتقريب بين مختلف الحضارات والثقافات. السيدة الرئيسة، ختاما تدعو مملكة البحرين كافة أعضاء الأسرة الدولية إلى التضامن في مواجهة ممارسات الكراهية والعنصرية والتعصب، وذلك من خلال وحدة أعضاء المجلس الموقر، والعمل على تبني مقاربة حقوقية شاملة في إطار إعلان وبرنامج عمل ديربان، وبعيدا عن التسييس واستهداف أي بلدان بعينها، من أجل ضمان وضع أطر فعالة تهدف إلى تشجيع التفاهم والتعايش السلمي ومكافحة الكراهية والتمييز العنصري بجميع أشكاله. شكرا سيدة الرئيسة.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Japan.
Thank you, Madam President. Japan thanks the African Group for its initiative on the urgent debate. The elimination of racial discrimination is a universal agenda that the international community should tackle together in unity. Japan has consistently and actively participated in the international efforts geared towards ending racial discrimination. As repeatedly stated on numerous occasions, Japan considers that a constructive approach should guide the joint endeavors by the international community towards the eradication of racial discrimination. This universal issue must not lead to worsening confrontation between states. Under circumstances in which a country is making its own efforts to address the problem through broad discussion, unilaterally directing criticism is not constructive, as it results in criticizing such positive efforts. Racial discrimination remains rampant throughout the world. It is essential that each state, including Japan, strive to eliminate such discrimination and that the international community encourage these efforts. Japan will continue to pursue a society where every individual is respected and can enjoy all human rights and develop his or her character without being subjected to any forms of discrimination. Japan will work tirelessly towards this end in cooperation with the international community, including the United Nations and civil society. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Je passe la parole au Sénégal.
Madame la haute commissaire, le Sénégal s'associe à la déclaration prononcée au nom du groupe africain et salue la tenue de ce débat urgent sur les violations des droits de l'homme d'inspiration raciale, le racisme systémique, la brutalité policière et la violence contre des manifestations politiques. Au moment où la communauté internationale a fini de célébrer la 71e année de la Déclaration universelle des droits de l'homme, le Sénégal déplore que les principes d'égalité, de non-discrimination, de justice et de fraternité contenus dans la dite déclaration soient bafoués eu égard à l'intolérance qui caractérise des relations humaines, aux actes racistes perpétrés ça et là et qui sont source d'exclusion, de discrimination, de déshumanisation et de violence de toutes sortes. Ainsi, le racisme continue de s'exprimer et d'être assumé dans de nombreux pays, ce qui est en flagrante contradiction avec les engagements consignés dans la Charte des Nations Unies et par lesquels nous affirmons, je cite, notre foi dans les droits fondamentaux de l'homme, dans la dignité et la valeur de la personne humaine. Fin de citation. La progression fulgurante de l'incitation à la haine et la discrimination basée sur la race, en particulier à l'encontre des personnes d'ascendance africaine, marque un coup de frein aux principes fondamentaux d'égalité et de non-discrimination. Face à ce phénomène, il urge de s'attaquer à ses causes structurelles et immédiates, ainsi que son impact sur la jouissance des droits de l'homme. Le Sénégal est d'avis que nous devons tous nous remobiliser en vue de faire barrage au racisme qu'il faut rejeter et condamner sous toutes ses formes et manifestations. À l'heure où le monde est bouleversé par des épisodes douloureux de racisme systémique, le Conseil des droits de l'homme est sans l'ombre d'un doute l'endroit idéal où la conjonction de nos efforts pourrait nous mener vers plus d'humanisme dans un cadre de dialogue, de coopération et d'espoir pour que les principes de la Déclaration universelle des droits de l'homme deviennent une réalité partout dans le monde pour les peuples des Nations Unies. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur, and I pass the floor to Nigeria.
Nigeria aligns itself with the statement delivered on behalf of the African Group. We welcome the holding of this urgent debate on the racially inspired police brutality, which has led to the tragic death of George Floyd in Minneapolis, United States of America. Nigeria condemns the death of George Floyd and all other persons who have suffered similar fates and offer its sincere condolences to their families. We also welcome actions taken by the U.S. authorities in ensuring that perpetrators are brought to justice. This ugly incident should serve as a clarion call on the need for all states to take urgent action in addressing systemic racism and racial discrimination, which is being suffered by Africans and peoples of African descent for decades. The spontaneous protests across the world with the slogan, Black Lives Matter, has clearly sent the message that enough is enough, and therefore drastic and immediate action must be taken by the international community in order to bring an enduring end to this menace. Madam President, as aptly provided in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. States have the primary responsibility to ensure the protection and promotion of the human rights and fundamental freedom of their citizens. In this regard, therefore, Nigeria reiterates its call for concerted effort toward the effective and comprehensive implementation of the Durban Declaration and Program of Action, which is view to ending all forms of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerances, thereby engendering peace and harmony among all human races. In conclusion, we emphasize the imperative of ensuring racial equality and equal opportunities for all members of our societies, as well as ensure equality before the law, in line with the principles of the rule of law. This will immensely help in ensuring inclusive societies as well as peaceful and harmonious coexistence among people. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much. And we now hear from Fiji. I believe it's a video message.
Madam President, Fiji extends its appreciation to the African Group for requesting this urgent debate. This debate, arising from global concern and anger at the death of George Floyd in police custody, is an important opportunity for each country to reflect on its own shortcomings in addressing equality before the law. Madam President, we have struggled with racism in Fiji since we were colonized in 1874. Race and ethnicity have contributed to military coups and political upheaval in our country. Historically, ethnicity determined the relationship between Fijians and the government. When a country's political and social fabric judges individuals not on the basis of their individual worth, but on the basis of their ethnicity, and when the legal system and the attitudes of those who run that legal system ignore substantive equality before the law to prefer differential treatment on the basis of race and ethnicity, racism is institutionalized. We have had to face the unpleasant reality of our own historical past in order to make meaningful change. Fiji's 2013 constitutional reform and our legal reforms are intended to remove systemic discrimination. Madam President, despite these steps, Fiji still struggles with racism, as do all other countries. Even the best legal and constitutional declarations of equality are not enough to remove institutionalized racism. Institutions are run, essentially, by individuals who often believe in the privilege and exclusivity of particular ethnic groups. Institutions, including law enforcement agencies, must take active steps to remove conscious and unconscious bias from recruitment policies, promotion policies, and in the delivery of services. It is not enough for those who hold leadership to say that they are against racism. They must have strong and effective policies to sanction those who are guilty of racist behavior within the organization. Such policies must recognize intersectional and multiple forms of discrimination. Fiji welcomes this timely and crucial debate. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much. And the next is a video message from Bangladesh.
Thank you, Madam President. We reckon today's debate is important and timely. Bangladesh always supports international community's endeavors against racism, apartheid, and all forms of discrimination. Discrimination is the antithesis of everything humanity stands for. Bangladesh reiterates her unswerving conviction to preventing this menace in all its manifestation. Through his lifelong struggle for people's emancipation, the father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, made it a point that Bangladesh would always stand for equality, dignity, and justice for all. Human rights and fundamental freedoms as justiciable principles are embedded into our constitution. Madam President, we are deeply concerned that discrimination based on racism, xenophobia, and Islamophobia are on the rise in a horrific proportion everywhere. We seek a complete elimination of racially inspired human rights violations and state-sponsored discrimination against individuals or groups on any grounds whatsoever. Accountability and justice must be ensured both at national and international levels. Rule of law should not only be a prescription only for some, it must be respected by all states regardless. In our common journey towards building peaceful, just and inclusive societies, we must heavily invest in our respective communities to bring change in our thoughts and attitudes, indeed in the hearts and souls of all our peoples. The illuminating power of education must also be harnessed to instill the right values in young minds. Today it is heartening to see peoples around the world uniting to seek remedy against institutionalized and systematic social injustices that our societies faced for decades or even centuries. It is indeed a clarion call for the Human Rights Council. If the Council has to act as the true lighthouse of people and people's hope, it has to discharge its chartered duties. It must reflect on people's protest of a global scale. The Committee of Nations must live up to its own charter and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We urge the international community to forcibly condemn and combat the scourge of violations and violences in all its forms. Our collective efforts should succeed in creating a world based on tolerance, inclusion, justice, peace, equality, equity, and human rights. I thank you.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker is Spain.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta. España suscribe la declaración de la Unión Europea presentada anteriormente y nos gustaría, asimismo, complementar señalando que la pervivencia del racismo cuestiona la esencia de los derechos humanos construidos sobre la igualdad en dignidad y derechos de los seres humanos. Sin embargo, el racismo sigue siendo un fenómeno actual en todas las regiones del mundo. Pocos, si alguno, de los delegados que participamos en esta sesión podemos afirmar que nuestros países se han liberado por completo de la lacra de la discriminación por motivos raciales, como tampoco han logrado erradicar plenamente la discriminación por otros motivos como género, orientación sexual, religión, etc. En este marco sombrío, las manifestaciones pacíficas que se han sucedido en muchas partes del mundo, incluido mi país, para denunciar los actos de violencia y racismo representan un motivo de esperanza. Los Estados no podemos prestar oídos sordos a ese llamamiento al reconocimiento del carácter universal de los derechos humanos y del principio fundamental de la igualdad. Tampoco debemos olvidar que, afortunadamente, el Sistema Internacional de Promoción y Protección de los Derechos Humanos cuenta con un buen arsenal de mecanismos con el que estamos bien equipados para luchar contra el racismo. Siempre, evidentemente, que exista voluntad real de vencer en esta batalla. No es casualidad que el primero de los tratados fundamentales de las Naciones Unidas sobre Derechos Humanos sea la Convención para la Eliminación de la Discriminación Racial, sobre la que los Estados fuimos capaces de ponernos de acuerdo antes incluso de adoptar los dos pactos. El comité que supervisa la aplicación de la Convención puede y debe jugar un papel fundamental en la erradicación del racismo. Pero en la lucha contra el racismo es necesario actuar simultáneamente en varios frentes, como por ejemplo la protección frente a la violencia, la garantía de acceso a la justicia o a la educación. En España también experimentamos el fenómeno del racismo, pero seguimos trabajando sirviéndonos, por ejemplo, entre otros, de las recomendaciones del Grupo de Trabajo sobre Afrodescendientes y las emitidas por el Comité sobre Discriminación Racial. También los mandatos de varios procedimientos especiales creados por este Consejo, en particular el Relator Especial sobre Formas Contemporáneas de Racismo, Discriminación Racial, Xenofobia y Formas Conexas de Intolerancia, han sido concebidos con ese objetivo y por ello hacemos un llamamiento a todos los Estados para cooperar lealmente con esos mecanismos. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, embajador. Et je donne la parole au Togo.
Merci Madame la Présidente. Madame la Présidente, le Togo souscrit à la déclaration faite par la République centrafricaine au nom du groupe africain. Madame la Présidente, l'image de George Floyd agonisant jusqu'à la mort sous le genou de son bourreau implacable, pendant que ce dernier adressait au monde entier un regard de défiance, constitue l'expression banalisée de la haine raciale. Cette image nous interpelle toute l'humanité entière. Les multiples manifestations qui se déroulent à travers le monde, au-delà des frontières, et aussi au-delà de la couleur de la peau, démontrent combien, aujourd'hui, Madame la Présidente, nous avons l'occasion de constater que les efforts des nations du monde, grandes, petites, riches, moins riches, avec nos diversités multiples. Madame la Présidente, nous sommes réunis ici au nom de l'égalité, au nom de la diversité à travers les États. C'est pourquoi nous devons, à partir de ce jour, mettre tout en œuvre pour que nous puissions aboutir à des résultats sur ce qui constitue un fléau pour toute l'humanité, un fléau vicieux et insidieux qui est le racisme sous toutes ses formes, y compris à travers ses expressions de brutalité, de crimes liés à l'intolérance, aux stéréotypes et à la xénophobie. Madame la Présidente, il est temps de s'interroger sur la portée de la mise en œuvre des multiples engagements internationaux, sur l'efficience des actions menées à tous les niveaux. Il est temps de faire l'évaluation de la déclaration et programme d'action de Vienne. Il est temps de mettre en œuvre de façon effective la déclaration de Durban contre le racisme, la discrimination raciale. Au-delà, nous sommes tous conscients aujourd'hui qu'il faut renforcer les mécanismes établis, leur fournir les moyens de mise en œuvre de leurs mandats respectifs de façon complémentaire, nous assurer que les recommandations sont suivies d'effets. Cela suppose le renforcement des législations nationales et surtout la coopération de tous les États avec les mécanismes des Nations Unies dédiés à cette cause. Madame la Présidente, mon pays, le Togo, reste engagé dans la lutte contre toute expression et manifestation de racisme et de discrimination conformément à sa Constitution et au regard des engagements internationaux qu'il a pris. Ce jour doit être celui d'un nouvel élan pour la mobilisation de tous afin que les générations futures, pour les générations futures, la couleur de la peau ou toute forme de différence ne soit plus jamais soit un privilège d'innocence pour certains ou une présomption de culpabilité pour d'autres, nulle part dans le monde. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur. And I give the floor to Ukraine.
President, Ukraine aligns itself to the statement on behalf of the EU. We express our deep sympathy to the family and friends of George Floyd, as well as to those of victims of racism and police brutality in all parts of the world. The recent mass public demonstrations all over the world, including in the United States, under the slogan Black Lives Matter, are a strong evidence that societies across the globe reject racial violence and demand from their respective governments effective steps to overcome injustice, thus fulfilling their obligations under the International Convention on the Elimination of all forms of racial discrimination. Ukraine fully adheres to freedoms of expression, opinion and peaceful assembly and supports the fight against all forms of racism, discrimination and intolerance everywhere. We are confident that strong, open and inclusive democratic systems, such as in the United States, underpinned with the rule of law, genuine civil society and effective checks and balances, are able to ensure equality for all. We are encouraged by comprehensive steps and decisions by the US leadership, including in recent legislative initiatives aimed at significant police reform. We are confident that the US judiciary system will effectively address the relevant cases. The timely response of the judiciary, including the latest ruling of the US Supreme Court on issue of non-discrimination, is yet another evidence of democratic traditions and equality ideas being deeply rooted within the American society. Such a wide public debate and involvement prove how the country is united to address challenges it currently faces to achieve even greater social cohesion. This tragedy gives us an opportunity to learn lessons which, as events around the world demonstrate, are relevant to all countries across the globe. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And I now give the floor to Germany.
Madam President, Germany aligns itself with the EU statement. We welcome the opportunity to address this very important issue. As our Minister for Foreign Affairs expressed at the opening session of this Human Rights Council, discrimination and hatred against people who look, live, love, think or believe differently than the majority of a society threatens the entire society. Just recently, the shocking death of George Floyd, and especially the unwarranted police brutality, were a stark reminder of the task lying ahead of us. We all urgently need to address the global problem of racism and its root causes. We are encouraged by the many people that took to the streets in the past weeks around the world, also in the US, in Germany and many parts of Europe. Through peaceful protests, they sent a clear sign that they are not willing to accept racism. Also in Germany, racism remains a problem. In February this year, 9 people with migrant backgrounds were killed by a right-wing extremist murderer in the German town of Hanau. Racism should, however, not be reduced to single acts by right-wing extremists or other individuals, including public officials. Many people all over the world suffer from structural racism in their daily lives. By taking preventive action, we must make clear that discrimination has no place in our society and especially in our administrations. We must ensure that racist crimes are prosecuted and that accessible remedies are in place. For the German government, the fight against all forms of racism and racial discrimination is a key priority. Last October, it decided upon a comprehensive set of measures against right-wing extremism, including public services and against hate crimes. These measures are in addition to our National Action Plan against racism, which includes a multitude of educational and awareness-raising measures. Madam President, action at the national level alone is, however, not sufficient. Since racism is a global problem, we need to fight together. The multilateral system offers instruments to enhance international cooperation against racism, including debates under Item 9 and established special procedures such as the Special Rapporteur on Contemporary Forms of Racism and the Working Group on People of African Descent. Germany is ready to work within these frameworks to achieve further progress. An important step would also be for all states to ratify and fully implement the International Convention on the Elimination of all forms of racial discrimination. We need to act together. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. And I give the floor to my colleague from Austria.
Madam President, Austria aligns itself with the statement of the European Union. We would like to thank the African Group for convening this urgent debate, which is timely and pertinent. We are appalled by the brutal killing of George Floyd and the suffering of other victims of racially motivated violence. Our thoughts are with their families. The last words of George Floyd, "I can't breathe," echoed around the world as a rallying cry for equality and human dignity. We express our strong support to all those who are peacefully protesting to end racism. We unequivocally condemn racist violence, racism and all forms of discrimination, including by the police and others in position of authority, against people of African descent and other persons belonging to minorities. We need to act urgently to tackle the scourge of structural racism and discrimination. However, let's be clear. Racism is not limited to one country in the world, but it is a global problem. Therefore, The international community cannot remain silent, and we welcome this opportunity for the Human Rights Council to reaffirm our joint commitment for action. Austria would also like to reiterate its support for the work of the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. Madam President, peaceful protests should not be hijacked by those seeking violence. We are concerned about incidents and attacks by the police as well as demonstrators against journalists and the media covering these protests. Against this background, we would like to reiterate that a free press constitutes a fundamental pillar of any democracy. It must be safeguarded at all times, and journalists must be free to report without facing violence, arrest, or intimidation. We trust that the de-escalation of tensions will prevail, and we will remain confident that the US authorities will ensure a swift investigation and fair trial in full respect of the rule of law and human rights. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, and I pass the floor to Denmark.
President, Denmark aligns itself with the statement made by the EU. Denmark would like to thank the group of African countries for initiating today's debate. The developments around the world show that it is indeed an important and timely discussion. Denmark strongly condemns racial discrimination and racially motivated violence. Such acts violate basic human rights and must not be tolerated in any parts of the world. Sadly, the reality is that they do happen in all parts of the world. The tragic death of George Floyd reminds us of that. Like people in the United States, we were saddened by his death while in police custody, and we express our condolences to the family. We note that the competent authorities have taken steps to investigate the circumstances. Ensuring full transparency and prosecution of criminal acts is fundamental to ensuring justice in respect for universal human rights. All governments must act to prevent and denounce state-authorized excessive use of force, especially by law enforcement personnel. Law enforcement authorities must be well-trained, professional, and act in accordance with international rights obligations. We are pleased to note positive public mobilization against racism in the recent weeks in all parts of the world. The freedom to peaceful assembly as well as freedom of expression are fundamental to ensuring inclusive and tolerant societies. I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. And the next speaker is Kataha.
شكرا سيدتي الرئيسة. في البدء تعرب دولة قطر عن موقفها المبدئي المناهض والمستنكر لكل الممارسات العنصرية والقائمة على التمييز العنصري بغض النظر عن مرتكبيها ومكان ارتكابها وهوية ضحاياها. ونؤكد في هذا الخصوص على أن المساواة ومنع التمييز هي التزامات دولية نصت عليها جميع مواثيق حقوق الإنسان، وهي مبادئ تشكل جزء من الأساس الذي يقوم عليه مبدأ سيادة حكم القانون. لذلك فإن أي شكل من أشكال الإفلات من العقاب على الجرائم التي ترتكب بدوافع تمليئها مواقف عنصرية وتمييزية يلعب دورا في إضعاف سيادة حكم القانون، ويشجع على تكرار مثل هذه الجرائم ويوافق تداعياتها، كما ينعكس سلبا على الاستقرار والأمن والتعايش السلمي المشترك. أن العديد من المآسي التي يشهدها العالم اليوم مصدرها الرئيسي هو الممارسات العنصرية التمييزية التي تطال فئات معينة في المجتمع انطلاقا من جنسياتهم أو أصلهم العرقي أو حتى ديانتها، أو على الرغم من الجهود التي بذلت منذ عقود طويلة لإرساء مبادئ التسامح والمساواة، فإن ظواهر التعصب والعنصرية والتمييز عادت في الآونة الأخيرة إلى الظهور والانتشار في مختلف أنحاء العالم، وليس ببعيد ما يتعرض له المهاجرون واللاجئون والأقليات من انتهاكات لحقوقهم بشكل يومي، بما في ذلك حقهم في الحياة، بسبب خطاب الكراهية ضدهم والمواقف العدائية التي تتخذ اتجاههم من قبل عدة من الأحزاب المتطرفة، وبعض الشخصيات السياسية من أجل تحقيق مكاسب سياسية في ظل ظروف دولية اقتصادية واجتماعية وسياسية بالغة التعقيد. سيدة الرئيسة، انطلاقا من قناعتنا الراسخة بأن العنصرية والتمييز العنصري يشكلان مخالفة المقاصد ومبادئ الأمم المتحدة والإعلان العالمي لحقوق الإنسان وانتهاكا صريحا لجميع اتفاقيات حقوق الإنسان، فإن هذا المجلس معني أكثر من أي آلية أخرى باتخاذ إجراءات فعالة ضد هذه الممارسات وليس الاكتفاء بمجرد شجبها أو إدانتها. كما ندعو أيضا جميع الدول المشاركة تجاربها الإيجابية في القضاء على العنصرية والتمييز العنصري، وتشجيع أيضا اتخاذ تدابير محدودة كتعزيز وسائل الرقابة على الممارسات العنصرية التمييزية، فضلا عن تعزيز سبل الإبلاغ وسبل الانتصاف والتعويض، وتضمين برامج تدريب ومناهج تدريس بما في ذلك بالمعاهد العسكرية والأمنية ومعاهد الشرطة، ومواد مبنية على حقوق الإنسان لا سيما تلك المتعلقة بالمساواة ومنع التمييز. وأخيرا تعزيز آلية المحاسبة الفعالة ومنع الإفلات من العقاب لمرتكبي هذه الجرائم والانتهاكات لمنع تكرارها. وشكرا سيدة الرئيسة.
Thank you, Ambassador. And the next speaker is Somalia.
Thank you, Madam President. My delegation fully associated itself with the statement made by the distinguished representative of Central African Republic on behalf of the group of African states. My delegation would like to join its voice to that of the world community in paying tribute to the victims of racism and their families. We would also like to denounce and condemn this blatant violation of basic human rights that occurs in various parts of the world, including the developed and democratic countries. Madam President, today the world is facing another worse enemy which is more robust and dangerous than the COVID-19. It hurts people in a discriminatory manner in the past. It continues to do so today. It might also hurt tomorrow if we remain silent and observer. This enemy is racism with all its faults. Unfortunately, the primary victims of this evil are minority groups such as refugees, asylum seekers, people of African descent. Despite the existence of many legal instruments at national, regional, and international level, people are still suffering from injustice, atrocity relating to racial discrimination. The tragic death, the senseless killing of Mr. George Floyd in Minneapolis in the United States, is a perfect example that reminds us of all this sad reality. The abuse of power and the violence that are happening in full view of everyone demonstrate once again the fragility and ineffectiveness of our current justice system and protection for the victim of human rights violation. Madam President, there are many things that need to be done in this issue, and we believe that the Human Rights Council has a moral duty to find a durable solution to the root causes and consequences of racial profiling. This august body has also the mandate to promote and protect the human rights for everyone, including those who are victims of systemic racism, police brutality, and the violence in general. Madam President, we heard the heartfelt message of the family of George Floyd. They are waiting our help. Let us unite our effort to assist them in their legitimate battle for the justice. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker is Sudan.
شكرا السيدة الرئيسة. ينضم السودان للبيانات المقدم بالنيابة عن المجموعة الأفريقية والمجموعات التي ينتمي إليها. يرحب السودان بالمشاركة رفيعة المستوى من الاتحاد الأفريقي والأمم المتحدة والسيدة المفوضة السامية لحقوق الإنسان في هذه الجلسة المخصصة لمناقشة الانتهاكات الحالية لحقوق الإنسان على أساس عنصري ووحشية الشرطة في مواجهة الاحتجاجات السلمية، ويشيد بالموافقة على عقد هذه الجلسة العاجلة في هذا التوقيت، حيث أن مجلس حقوق الإنسان لم يكن ليبقى صامتا إزاء هذه الانتهاكات الجسيمة في الوقت الذي أوصلت فيه جموع غفيرة من شعوب العالم صوتها الرافض للحوادث العنصرية التي ظل يتعرض لها بشكل متكرر وممنهج الأفارقة والأشخاص المنحدرين من أصول أفريقية في مناطق عديدة من العالم. السيدة الرئيسة كشفت الحادثة المؤسفة لمقتل السيد جورج فلويد عن الحاجة لقيام السلطات المختصة في كثير من بلدان العالم التي شهدت أحداثا مماثلة بمراقبة السلوك القاسي والعنف غير المبرر الذي تمارسه بعض قوات الأمن تجاه الأفارقة والأشخاص المنحدرين من أصول أفريقية، مما يتوجب تعزيز التعاون المشترك للتأكد من امتلاك الدول للآليات الفاعلة والقادرة على مخاطبة جذور المشكلات المتعلقة بالحط من قدر الأشخاص المنحدرين من أصول أفريقية من عنصرية وتمييز ووصم وتقليل من كرامتهم وحرمانهم من الحقوق المكفولة لهم بموجب كل الاتفاقيات والمواثيق الدولية. السيدة الرئيسة، لقد جاءت ثورة ديسمبر المجيدة في بلادي من أجل القضاء على العنصرية والتمييز بكل أشكاله، وعملت حكومة بلادي على تعزيز المساواة ومحاربة التمييز والقضاء عليه. وستشهد الفترة القادمة المزيد من الإجراءات التي تتوافق مع توجهات حكومة الفترة الانتقالية التي وافقت على فتح مكتب للمفوض السامية من أجل تقديم المساعدة الفنية في تعزيز أوضاع حقوق الإنسان في البلاد. السيدة الرئيسة، لقد ناقشنا بالأمس فقط خلال جلسة النقاش العام في البند التاسع من لائحة الأعمال المجلس إعلان وبرنامج عمل ديربون، وقد أكدت الكثير من الدول خلال بياناتها دعم الجهود التي يقوم بها فريق العمل المعني ببرنامج عمل ديربون. شكرا جزيلا سيدة الرئيسة.
Thank you, Ambassador. And we now hear from the Philippines. It's actually a video statement which we have found meanwhile.
Thank you, Madam President. There has been little dispute about technical cooperation as an important aspect of the work of the Council and of the OHCHR that advances our shared goal to promote and protect human rights. We welcome the focus duly given by the OHCHR to technical cooperation and to forging partnerships with countries in this regard. We join calls for this focus.
I think we need to stop this. This is the wrong video.
Budget constraints. We believe that this focus should be reflected accordingly and clearly in the budget and program of the OHCHR in terms
May I ask technicians to stop this? I think it's the video on another item. I'm very sorry to the Philippines. We'll try to. Okay, I propose that we are moving to the list of observer states, and while we wait for the right Filipino video to be found. And we start with UN Women, please. That's another video statement. I hope it's the correct one.
Madam President, distinguished delegates, UN Women believes that women are part of their lived experiences. These experiences impact on who they become, as well as on their families. These may be religious, these may be racial, cultural, or sexual orientation. The working group of experts on people of African descent have highlighted that girls and women of African descent are likely to be poorer, less educated, and with less opportunities everywhere in the world. We are now seeing outpouring solidarity, as well as people protesting in the streets against systemic as well as brutal racism. We need to fight against racism too, in our own institutions and everywhere in the world, because only if we are united, we will build back together after COVID. In fighting apartheid, it took people of the world also to be in solidarity and to fight together and help to end apartheid. This time has come again. We must be united to end racism as well as gender inequality in the world.
Thank you. And we now hear from Jordan.
الرحيم. السيدة الرئيسة، ينعقد مجلسنا الموقر اليوم استجابة لمظاهر احتجاجية في عدد من دول العالم، وينبغي علينا جميعا أن ندرك أن العنصرية وغيرها من أشكال التمييز ضد المكونات المتنوعة في الدول ما زالت سلوكياتها مستمرة على الرغم من أنها محظورة بموجب القانونين الدولي والوطني. إن السبيل الأمثل لضمان تمتع الأجيال المقبلة بحياة مزدهرة تقوم على أسس المساواة والعدالة وحكم القانون يكون من خلال غرس القيم النبيلة في النشء الجديد في جميع مراحل التعليم والإعداد أولاً، وثانياً من خلال ضمان تطبيق سيادة القانون على الجميع وإجراء تحقيقات قضائية فاعلة في أي أحداث مرتبطة بالعنصرية والتمييز، وثالثاً من خلال برامج التوعية عبر وسائل الإعلام والتواصل الاجتماعي بمخاطر العنصرية والتمييز التي تقوض أركان المجتمع وإن قيضت له أسباب المناعة الاجتماعية والاقتصادية والبشرية. ختاماً، ندعو جميع الدول والحكومات إلى ضمان احترام القوانين والتشريعات والمبادئ القانونية التي تجرب العنصرية بكافة أشكالها المدانة والتي تنتهك أبسط حقوق الإنسان، وإعمال المبادئ السامية التي تضمنها الإعلان العالمي لحقوق الإنسان واتفاقية القضاء على جميع أشكال التمييز العنصري وغيرها من الأدوات القانونية. وشكرا السيدة الرئيسة.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Sweden.
Thank you, Madam President. Sweden aligns itself with the statement made by the EU. Let me begin by reaffirming our determination to combat all forms of racism. Racism, xenophobia, and prejudice restrict people's lives and create a breeding ground for violence and hate crime. This is unacceptable. Ultimately, these acts constitute threats not only to individuals, but also to our societies and to democracy. As partners, we have watched recent events in the US with pain. We all have a responsibility to fight racism. None of our countries is immune. Safeguarding journalists is key, as well as protecting the rights and safety of people to voice their concerns. We take note that the competent authorities in the US have taken steps to investigate the circumstances surrounding George Floyd's death and to ensure full transparency. We as states need to become better at identifying all forms of discrimination, racism, and similar forms of hostility in order to expose, confront, and adopt measures to combat it. We will continue to work tirelessly to this end. I thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is the Democratic People's Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Madam President. The DPRK delegation aligns itself with the statement delivered on behalf of the NAM, and we support the African group in initiating these urgent debates at the Human Rights Council. We are deeply concerned and strongly condemn the continuing racial discriminatory and violent practice against African and people of African descent and structural racism endemic in the United States and other parts of the world. The current tragedy disclosed obviously against chronic racial discrimination, social inequality, and institutional defects in the United States. The systematic racial discrimination in the United States constitutes the world's hottest human rights issue, as it is a violation of the international human rights instruments, including the ICERD and the DPA. The Human Rights Council should react to the systematic racial discrimination practice of the United States with rigorous approach, righteous standpoint, and action-oriented measures against racial discrimination. We urge the United States to implement its international obligation, eliminate root causes of racism, racial discrimination, and other human rights violations, and guarantee the legitimate rights of the people of African descent and other ethnic minorities. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Doy la palabra a Cuba.
Señora Presidenta, agradecemos la convocatoria a este debate urgente y en particular al Grupo Africano por su liderazgo en esta iniciativa. Casi 2 décadas después de la Conferencia Mundial de Durban, el flagelo del racismo, la discriminación y la xenofobia continúan avanzando en un mundo cada vez más desigual y envuelto en múltiples y complejas crisis. No nos engañemos, el abominable asesinato de George Floyd en Estados Unidos no es una acción aislada. Es parte de una saga consistente de violaciones de derechos humanos basadas en el color de la piel y el origen étnico, amparadas en siglos de racismo estructural y en la profunda desigualdad económica y en la distribución de ingresos que perpetúa el sistema político, social y jurídico de ese país, fundado sobre la esclavitud, el privilegio de las élites y el despojo de las mayorías. La realidad es que el racismo y la violencia policial contra los afrodescendientes y las minorías no son excepciones o errores de ese sistema, son el sistema. Esperamos que estos lamentables hechos marquen un antes y un después en el futuro de la lucha contra el racismo, la discriminación y el maltrato a las personas afrodescendientes. Señora Presidenta, concluyo reiterando el llamado a implementar el programa de acción de Durban y adoptar las acciones que permitan de una vez y por todas que todos seamos tratados como iguales. Con Cuba siempre se podrá contar para ese noble esfuerzo. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, embajador. I now give the floor to Seychelles.
Madam President, the government of Seychelles observes with consternation the systemic racial injustice against people of African descent and the protests held across the world in outrage and opposition. We take this opportunity to express our sadness and sympathy with the victims of these injustices and their families. Racially motivated human rights violations have no place in any society that aims to be based upon the principles of tolerance, respect for human dignity, and the rule of law. As an African state populated by a meld of ethnicities, Seychelles' constitution proudly recognizes that as descendants of different races, we have learned to live together as one nation and to serve as an example of a harmonious multiracial society. We are proud of our heritage, Madam President, but we remain conscious that the fight against racism is not achieved by proclamations and words alone. It has become essential for all of us, as countries, as communities, as businesses, and as individuals, to look inwards, to reflect, and to put in place concrete and sustainable paths of action to address systemic racism wherever it occurs. We look forward to supporting the initiatives of the Human Rights Council to constructively address the situation in the United States of America, as well as the insidious trails of racism and xenophobia in our global community. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker is Botswana.
Thank you, Madam President. The horrific images we witnessed on our television screens on 25th May 2020, when George Floyd was killed while begging for breath, a basic requirement for life, reminded all of us that the sacred pledge of all humanity is to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights and the dignity and worth of the human person, unquote. Awakened by the near possibility of becoming complicit in the monstrosity and repeat acts of impunity, the global masses chose to stand up against the tragic passing of George Floyd. A rare but welcome chorus of voices responded and called out injustices and brutality faced by Africans and people of African descent on a daily basis. The protests forced all of us to look in the mirror and introspect on the state of the world, reflected also in the horrors of slavery, colonialism, apartheid, among others. Botswana has in this council and elsewhere maintained a consistent position of placing the highest premium on protection against abuses and safeguarding the interests of victims of human rights by whoever, wherever, and whenever they occur. This debate on an issue that has gripped the world's attention in the past few weeks is unfortunately not an isolated event and has happened in many parts of the world. What remains unique this time is the solidarity portrayed by people of all races and different backgrounds in every corner of the world. Today, we seek the same solidarity among us as member states of the UN through a recommitment to our international obligations and addressing racism and racial discrimination. At the end of this urgent debate, we hope to adopt a resolution that reflects the outcome of today's historic deliberations, which will faithfully reflect this Council's disapproval of human rights violations. It will be up to all of us here to prove that the Human Rights Council will not be relegated to being a passive observer and that we will never take sides with an unjust system. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. We pass to Sierra Leone.
Madam President, my delegation would like to thank the Council for holding this urgent debate. Racially motivated human rights violations, systemic racism, and police brutality against Africans and people of African descent appear to be on the rise. This has been a problem all over the world, and we are now particularly concerned with the recent and unfolding events, including the gruesome killing by police of George Floyd and the excessive use of force against protesters. This singular incident has now focused the world's attention to this pernicious problem, and we must use it to address that problem in a decisive manner. We share the call by the UN High Commissioner on Special Procedures to end racial discrimination by law enforcement agencies and for the structural problems that has given rise to the global protest to be meaningfully addressed. In this regard, Sierra Leone urges the Council and all members of states to support the resolution tabled by the African Group. We urge all states to urgently address with greater resolve and political will all forms and manifestation of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance, and effectively implement the Durban Declaration and Program of Action and the outcome of documents of the Durban Review Conference. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much. Et je donne la parole à la France.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Madame la Présidente, je remercie le groupe africain pour la tenue de ce débat important que vous présidez si bien. Je souhaite saisir cette occasion pour présenter mes sincères condoléances à la famille de George Floyd, dont je comprends que certains membres sont ici présents ou représentés. Madame la Présidente, le mouvement de protestation qui secoue aujourd'hui le monde entier nous rappelle que les actes racistes, la discrimination, les discours de haine et la violence n'ont pas leur place dans nos sociétés. Le combat pour la justice, pour l'égalité doit se poursuivre chaque jour. Mon pays ne peut que se réjouir de ce mouvement universel, éminemment démocratique, dans lequel les citoyens de tous les pays du monde ont montré avec force que la justice va de pair avec l'exercice des libertés fondamentales. Le gouvernement français est intraitable face au racisme, face à l'antisémitisme, face aux discriminations. Parce que les forces de l'ordre sont dans la société, parce qu'elles en font partie, elles ne sont évidemment pas imperméables aux maux dont souffrent nos sociétés. Lorsque des propos ou des actes racistes sont commis, les responsabilités doivent être établies et les fautes sanctionnées, car l'exigence d'exemplarité pour les forces de l'ordre est indissociable de leur engagement dont nous leur sommes redevables. C'est pourquoi des décisions ont été annoncées en France pour que, au-delà de l'enquête disciplinaire ou judiciaire habituellement engagée, une mesure de suspension à titre conservatoire soit systématiquement envisagée dès lors qu'un acte raciste, sexiste, antisémite ou discriminatoire est avéré. Parce que mon pays sait trop bien où mène la xénophobie, la haine, la violence quand on les laisse faire. La France saura prendre sa place dans le combat collectif pour construire une société plus juste et pacifiée, dans laquelle chacun est reconnu dans sa dignité, son histoire, son identité, sans discrimination ni jugement. Le racisme, Madame la Présidente, ne passera pas. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur, et je donne la parole à la Belgique.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Belgium aligns itself with the EU statement. Belgium welcomes the convening of this urgent debate. Racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia continue to affect us all. No country can claim to be free of the scourge of racism. Recent tragic images culminated in renewed calls for decisive action led by the Black Lives Matter movement. Those events also stimulated ongoing public debate in Belgium. We do not turn a blind eye to part of our history nor to current forms of racial discrimination. Last year, our Prime Minister apologized to people born to white fathers and African mothers during the Belgian colonization for the injustices they suffered. He expressed the wish that these apologies would be a further step towards raising awareness about this part of Belgium's history and would strengthen Belgium's determination to continue to fight against all forms of discrimination, racism and xenophobia. Following last year's visit of the Working Group for People of African Descent, Belgium acknowledged the existence of contemporary forms of racial discrimination, particularly in the field of housing, employment and education. Belgium pledges to strengthen its effort to combat racial discrimination. In February 2020, an interministerial conference to combat racism was established with a view to elaborate a national plan of action. At the eve of the 20th anniversary of the Durban Conference Against Racism, we hope that we will all stand up together against racism and turn the fundamental equality of all human beings into a reality for each and every one of us. Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Merci beaucoup. I give the floor to Liechtenstein.
Thank you, Madam President, for giving me the floor. We thank the African Group for requesting this urgent debate on the current racially inspired human rights violations, systemic racism, police brutality and the violence against peaceful protesters. As a matter of principle, Liechtenstein condemns all forms of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, stigmatization and related intolerance. The COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the recent peaceful protests that took place in many countries in order to express sympathy with the Black Lives Matter movement, show that more needs to be done to tackle all forms of discrimination with regard to ensuring the enjoyment of all human rights for all without any kind of distinction. We would like to stress that the importance for states to take necessary measures to design and fully implement effective policies and programs to prevent, detect and ensure accountability for misconduct, including violence by police officers and other enforcement personnel, which is motivated by racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, stigmatization and related tolerance, and to prosecute perpetrators to such misconduct. Furthermore, we would like to reiterate that it is crucial that the right of peaceful assembly and association can be exercised freely. We reject any form of violence carried out by protesters and police forces during such peaceful protests. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I pass the floor to South Africa.
Thank you, Madam President. My delegation aligns itself with the statement made by the African Group and the Non-Aligned Movement. We are moved, Madam President, that as the Special Rapporteur on Racism recalled, we meet just a day after June the 16th, when 44 years ago, in 1976, unarmed children in Soweto were fired at and many killed by the apartheid regime, a nuclear weapon state, for daring to stand up for their humanity. And they were shot because they were African. As the Deputy Secretary General said, we must wage a sacred war against racism, so that the chilling images we saw in recent weeks do not take us back to the horror of Soweto in 1976, thereby tearing open wounds that we thought were healing. George Floyd's last words were, "I can't breathe. I can't breathe, officer, I can't breathe." I thank the Human Rights Council for having heard these words of anguish as Mr. Floyd's life was being extinguished in front of our eyes. Indeed, the Human Rights Council must be the ultimate defender of the weak and do so particularly for the descendants and the victims of the transatlantic slave trade. We all have a responsibility not to minimize the issue, not to generalize the issue, and not to diminish it, because that would be a form of racism in itself. We therefore hope that members of this Council will not balk at the resolution tabled by the African Group and adopted by consensus, which will place this Council on the right side of history and recommit it to the DDPA. In conclusion, Madam President, we mourn the death of George Floyd and others, and thank you from the bottom of our heart for your leadership.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I hope I'm not promising too much, but we hope to now hear from the Philippines.
Madam President, as a party to the ICERD, the Philippines actively supports UN initiatives to combat racism and prevent its occurrence. We welcome this urgent debate as it affirms the consonance of the Human Rights Council with communities across nations, painfully reawakened by recent incidents, to the reality that much remains to be done in eliminating all forms and practices of discrimination on the basis of race. There are remaining structural issues to address, including, regrettably, vestiges of colonialism in parts of the world. The Council has considered reports from treaty bodies and special procedures on systemic racism and xenophobia, especially in developed states involving people of African descent. Through the UPR process, states have engaged constructively to recommend measures at the national level to address this issue. The Philippines sees the value of evidence-based monitoring and evaluation and review systems embedded in the police force and relevant oversight bodies in ensuring that there is no systemic or institutionally sanctioned racism or use of excessive force in law enforcement. Consistent with its human rights policing and its zero-tolerance policy for impunity, the Philippine National Police has embarked on putting in place a real-time data recording and analysis system for its 205,000 officers in 1,766 police stations nationwide. This monitoring tool will use real-time data on complaints of human rights violations and on the status of investigations and cases to enable the police force to respond with timely interventions and to better protect human rights and prevent violations. We recognize the role of the Council, as well as of treaty bodies and the OHCHR, in fully mainstreaming human rights in the work of law enforcers and security authorities. We note that in its 2019 annual report, the OHCHR's technical cooperation with law enforcers comprised a significant part of its work, primarily in developing countries. We highly encourage the consideration of similar projects to address systemic racism and structural discrimination and police brutality involving people of African descent in various countries where these are occurring. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much, and apologies to the Philippines. We now give the floor to the United Nations Population Fund, which is again a video message.
I thank the Human Rights Council for holding this urgent debate. We're living through turbulent times. Protests have flared across the world as people cry out for justice. We join them in saying, Black Lives Matter. UNFPA reaffirms our commitment to the United Nations Charter towards an end to all forms of racism, discrimination, and marginalization. To deliver faster on the 2030 Agenda and the Nairobi Summit ICPD 25 commitments, UNFPA is intensifying our work during this, the decade of people of African descent. We're scaling up programs to empower women, girls, and young people of African descent. As someone with the good fortune to be African Panamanian myself, I know that this initiative will have profound meaning and inspire people of all races and ethnicities, of all backgrounds, to promote and achieve the Sustainable Development Goal of just, peaceful, and inclusive societies and institutions. Building an equal society begins with each of us. May recent events serve as a catalyst for countries to abolish long-standing inequalities and dismantle any remaining systemic barriers preventing marginalized communities from attaining their full human rights. We look forward to the positive results of this much-needed debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker is the Syrian Arab Republic.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam High Commissioner. Syria aligns itself with the statement delivered on behalf of NAM. We commend the initiative by the African Group for holding this urgent debate, which comes at times when racial discrimination and systemic racially motivated human rights violations are on the rise in some parts of the world, particularly in the United States. The killing of Mr. George Floyd was a tragic reminder of chronic racial discrimination, police brutality, and social inequalities targeting minorities in the U.S. We condemn this abhorrent crime and express our sincere condolences to the Floyd family. This urgent debate and the draft resolution proposed by the African Group should send a strong message that racially inspired violations shall not be tolerated. To this end, we continue to believe that the establishment of an independent international COI remains a step in the right direction. We express our concern over the resurgence of contemporary forms of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance, and deplore the use of social media platforms to promote racially inspired violence. We call on all states to effectively implement the Durban Declaration and POA and the Durban Review Conference outcome document. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Ambassador. The next speaker is Jamaica.
Madam President, Jamaica welcomes this urgent debate and joins in expressing its grave concern regarding the contemporary manifestations of systemic and structural racism, racial discrimination, and related intolerance in all its forms, as exhibited towards Afro-descendants, minorities, and people of color, violating their right to life, to fair and equal treatment before the law, and depriving them of their fundamental rights as enshrined in international human rights law. For decades, people of African descent and other minorities have had to live the harsh realities of institutional and other forms of racism. Recent events have served to underscore the growing concern with this issue. Given its long history of slavery, Jamaica takes very seriously its commitments under the Durban Declaration and Programme of Action and the International Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, which prohibit racism and racial discrimination in all its forms. Jamaica further reaffirms its unequivocal support for the International Decade for People of African Descent, which seeks to guarantee the full and equal participation of Afro-descendants in all aspects of society. We urge all members of the international community to take immediate and decisive action to ensure that perpetrators of racially motivated violence and other injustices are brought to account, as well as that other tangible actions are taken towards the dismantling of structural and systemic forms of racism. The full text of this statement will be available on the extranet. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much, and I give the floor to Morocco.
Le Maroc s'associe aux nombreuses voix qui s'expriment fortement contre toute forme de racisme et les actes criminels qui en découlent. En tant que creuset de populations d'origines diverses, enrichies de ses affluents africains, andalous, hébraïques et méditerranéens, le Royaume du Maroc est imprégné de culture et de valeurs sociétales de tolérance, de coexistence et de la reconnaissance de l'autre. Ainsi, le Maroc refuse toutes les expressions de racisme et les condamne de la manière la plus ferme. De l'avis de ma délégation, le présent débat urgent doit être l'occasion pour nous, membres du Conseil, de saisir le momentum international actuel pour inscrire plus que jamais la lutte contre le racisme comme une priorité et une urgence. Dans cette optique, le Maroc prône une approche responsable, mesurée, pragmatique et non conflictuelle. À cet égard, le Conseil, de notre point de vue, devrait user de tous ces mécanismes appropriés, voire de procédures nouvelles à envisager pour déterminer avec précision les formes de violence policière ou de toute répression ou violation des droits qui s'apparentent au racisme. Le Maroc appelle à la vigilance face à la montée des antagonismes à caractère identitaire, dont les conséquences pourraient s'avérer extrêmement dangereuses, voire catastrophiques, non seulement pour les populations qui en seraient victimes du fait de leur couleur ou de leurs origines, mais aussi sur le maintien de l'ordre public, de la paix et de la sécurité au plan régional et international. Je vous remercie, Madame la Présidente.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur. The next speaker is the United Nations Children's Fund.
For over 70 years, UNICEF's work around the world has focused on supporting the promotion, protection and fulfillment of all the rights of all children everywhere. In doing so, our work has sought to end, prevent and address the prevailing and systemic discriminations of every kind, including racism, that take place on a daily basis globally. We have witnessed how racism, xenophobia, discrimination and violence have caused trauma, harm and disruptions to the life of millions of children and their families, and have continuously led to violations of their rights. UNICEF is deeply concerned about the disproportionate and harmful impact on children who are still in evolving stages of physical and emotional maturity and development. These compounding experiences risk negatively shaping the way children see themselves, the world and their place in it far into the future. It is critical that immediate measures are taken to combat and address racial discrimination, as well as other forms of discrimination, violence, and hate speech. Over recent weeks and months, hundreds of thousands of people, including children and young people, have taken to the street to demand an end to inequality, including racism. Children have a right to safely share their views on issues concerning them and to be heard, and rights to peaceful assembly and freedom of expression. UNICEF urges states to proactively ensure that children can exercise these rights in a safe and peaceful manner, that they be heard, and that every child can live and grow to her or his full potential, free of any discrimination of any kind. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much. I give the floor to Iran.
Thank you, Madam President. We thank the African Group for initiating this historic urgent debate on an issue which relates to us all as human race. Mr. George Floyd's public execution in the hands of a policeman is indicative of the breadth and depth of institutionalized racism and racial profiling that have worsened constantly over the past 5 decades, distancing America further from Martin Luther King's ideal of beloved community. Many similar cases have happened without being documented or publicized. As noted by Washington Post, George Floyd serves as a literal embodiment of the thousands of black men who have been killed by law enforcement over the course of American history, who are destined to remain in anonymity. The long history of racial superiority, dating far back to colonial era and slavery, have paved the way for modern-day police brutality at home and aggressive belligerent policies and bullying abroad. Resorting to wholesale coercion of all sorts against other nations and peoples is the practical outcome of this inhuman attitude. We won't escape racial superiority without mindset unless and until we target its roots. Combating racism requires a genuine collective endeavors by us all to cultivate a culture of inherent equality of humankind and rejection of any sort of superiority. We are duty-bound to reverse the normalization of racial superiority and brutality, both at home and at the international level. This is the evil that has long sought to destroy the prospects for organized human life. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Next speaker is Egypt.
شكرا سيدة الرئيسة. يضم وفد مصر صوته إلى بيان المجموعة الأفريقية وبيان مجموعة حركة عدم الانحياز، ويود أن يضيف النقاط التالية. يرحب وفد مصر بعقد جلسة النقاش العاجل، ويعرب عن بالغ القلق تجاه الانتهاكات التي يتعرض لها المنحدرون من أصول أفريقية في العديد من الدول الغربية. إن البنية القانونية الدولية ذات الصلة بمكافحة التمييز العنصري والتعصب توفر أساساً جيداً لضمان احترام حقوق الإنسان لكافة الأفراد وعدم التمييز بينهم. ونطالب الدول الغربية بالامتثال للالتزامات التي نصت عليها الاتفاقيات والمواثيق الدولية ذات الصلة. ويؤكد وفد مصر أهمية الحوار والتعاون من أجل التصدي للممارسات العنصرية ضد المنحدرين من أصول أفريقية. ونشجع الدول الغربية على الاستفادة من برامج التعاون الفني التي تقدمها المفوضية السامية لحقوق الإنسان لبناء قدرات المسؤولين عن إنفاذ القانون وضمان احترامهم لحقوق الإنسان، ونحثها على التعاون مع الآليات التابعة لمجلس حقوق الإنسان المعنية بمكافحة التمييز العنصري. ونشير في هذا السياق إلى أهمية الانتهاء من وثيقة المعايير التكميلية للاتفاقية الدولية لقضاء التمييز العنصري لضمان التصدي لكافة أشكال المعاصرة للعنصرية. وشكرا سيدة الرئيسة.
Thank you, Ambassador. The next speaker is Canada.
Madam President, Canadians have joined their voices with others around the world to demand that entrenched systemic racism and discrimination be dismantled. Racism denies people their dignity and rights. Its pernicious effects are witnessed in gross inequities across all aspects of life, including criminal justice, health, and education. COVID-19 has exacerbated existing racial inequities, while catalyzing new and odious forms of xenophobia and scapegoating. Canada strives to be an inclusive country that respects diversity, but we recognize that systemic racism and discrimination in Canada continues to be a reality faced by Black Canadians, Indigenous peoples, and other racialized Canadians. There is still work to do. That is why Canada launched a federal anti-racism strategy in 2019, designed through meetings and consultations and informed by people with lived experiences. We cannot ignore systemic racism. There are no easy fixes. Uprooting systemic racism will require courageous and sustained commitment from all quarters of society. It will require all of us to call out racism and challenge prejudice and unconscious bias in our own lives and in the structures of society. A truly inclusive society that values diversity must include a wide range of voices, paying particular attention to those who have borne the heaviest burdens of racism. Canada is ready to do this work together with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. And the next speaker is Colombia.
Gracias, señora Presidente. Colombia agradece la convocatoria a este debate urgente promovido por el Grupo Africano para reconocer que el racismo, la discriminación racial y la xenofobia continúan siendo causa de violaciones de los derechos humanos y ocasionando sufrimiento y violencia en el mundo. Mi país condena los actos de racismo y xenofobia cometidos contra africanos, personas de ascendencia africana o cualquier otra persona por razones relacionadas con el color de su piel, sus creencias religiosas, sus opiniones o a quien eligen amar. Los Estados y el sistema internacional de los derechos humanos deben continuar actuando contra este flagelo y condenar cualquier acto de violencia cometido de manera arbitraria por la policía o las fuerzas militares. En ningún caso la violencia desproporcionada debe quedar en la impunidad. Colombia apoya con firmeza las aspiraciones de todos los pueblos del mundo a la justicia, la igualdad de oportunidades y el pleno disfrute de los derechos humanos sin ningún tipo de discriminación. Las sociedades libres y democráticas están basadas en el respeto y la protección de la dignidad inherente a cada individuo, sin ningún distingo. Mi país realiza grandes esfuerzos para avanzar en la promoción y plena garantía de los derechos humanos para todos los residentes en nuestro territorio. El Estado colombiano tiene el firme propósito y la voluntad política de eliminar todas las formas de discriminación e impulsar cambios que derrumben los muros del racismo, la xenofobia y los estereotipos y construyan equidad y oportunidades para la ciudadanía. Gracias, señora Presidente.
Muchas gracias. I now pass to the State of Palestine.
Thank you, Madam President. At the outset, we would like to express our deepest condolences to the families and loved ones of all those who have been killed as a result of police brutality and racially motivated crimes driven by supremacist ideologies in the United States. We would like to pay tribute to all those who fight against such oppression, discrimination, and injustice. We support convening the urgent debate to address the structural racism and discrimination that prevails around the world, with a tremendously negative impact on the enjoyment of human rights. The brutal images we are witnessing today in the United States and other parts of the world have rightfully inspired a global outrage at racial oppression, in particular against people of African descent, which has been systematic. This racially motivated violence should not just merely be condemned. We have a moral and legal obligation to speak for the silenced voices and ensure effective, concrete responses that would contribute to fight systemic racism and the legacies of slavery, colonialism, and apartheid. In this regard, we believe that an investigation and concrete action by the Human Rights Council is long overdue, as this issue has been ongoing for centuries. At the moment, some lives matter more than others. That is racism. That is unacceptable. Here, we reiterate that the lives of people of African descent matter too. Black lives matter. I thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Sri Lanka.
Madam President, Sri Lanka considers this urgent debate an important and timely decision by the Human Rights Council. We thank the African Group for proposing this initiative. As of today, we have passed several centuries since the inception of the modern notion of human rights and 75 years since its consolidation and proliferation through the UN Charter, followed by a series of core human rights instruments. While some progress has been made, events that occur from time to time, including the recent racially inspired human rights violations against persons of African descent, serve as a grim reminder that beneath the surface of perceived equality, centuries-long systemic prejudices and discrimination persist against some segments of the world population, in particular persons of African descent and people of different socially constructed notions of color. As a country that had been subject to centuries of colonialism, and as a co-sponsor of the historic 1955 Bandung Conference, which brought Asian and African leaders together in their call for equality among all races, Sri Lanka stands in solidarity with the African Group in their call to address these issues which impact on the enjoyment of human rights by people of African descent. In this regard, Sri Lanka associates itself with the statement delivered by the non-aligned movement. While expressions of solidarity are important, Sri Lanka strongly feels that it is through action at international level that we will be able to turn the International Decade for People of African Descent into a sincere and meaningful effort at ensuring recognition, justice, and development for persons of African descent. In conclusion, my delegation, while recalling Sri Lanka's active role in negotiations on the outcome document of the Durban Review Conference, wish to affirm Sri Lanka's commitment to the core principles of equality and non-discrimination embodied in the DDPA. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Lesotho.
Thank you, Madam President. My delegation aligns itself with a statement made by Burkina Faso on behalf of the African Group. We welcome every presentation by the panelists. The world cannot condone racism at all costs in this day and age. The death of George Floyd at the hands of law enforcement agencies in the United States is just but one of the many brutal deaths, violence and hatred perpetrated against people of African descent across the globe. My delegation categorically denounces such acts. Madam President, people of African descent suffer systemic racism and police brutality day in and day out. As such, Lesotho reiterates what was said 50 years ago at the Organization of African Unity Summit in Cairo. Malcolm X, on behalf of the Organization of African American Unity, gave a historic speech intended to bring awareness of the discrimination experienced by African Americans. In his speech, he noted, and I quote, "Your problems will never be fully solved until ours are solved. You will never be fully respected until we are too respected. You will never be recognized as free human beings until we too are recognized and treated as free human beings. Our problems is your problem. It is neither a black problem nor a specifically American problem. It is a global problem, a problem that involves all of humanity. It is not a civil rights problem, but a human rights problem." While expressing our sadness and sympathy, we are of the view that the world can use this difficult time to reflect on the actions we can take to tackle and put an end to racism and all forms of discrimination and prejudice against people of African descent. We strongly believe that states should criminalize all forms of racism, racial discrimination, and xenophobic attacks. I thank you.
Thank you very much, and may I appeal again to delegations to respect the time limit because we still have quite a list of speakers. Having said that, I turn to the Russian Federation.
Госпожа председатель, российская делегация неоднократно привлекала внимание международных правозащитных структур к факторам, которые привели к этой чудовищной ситуации – убийству полицейскими афроамериканца Джорджа Флойда. Расизм, полицейский произвол и беззаконие давно приняли в США системный характер. На справедливую критику со стороны мирового сообщества в Вашингтоне закрывали глаза десятилетиями, а проблемы между тем множились. Напомним, что США отказываются участвовать в большинстве основных международных договоров по правам человека, бойкотируют работу СПЧ. При этом они упорно продолжают критиковать другие государства по правозащитным поводам. Уверенность американской администрации в собственной непогрешимости, безнаказанности и мессианской роли во многом и привела к трагедии. В который раз призываем власти США всерьез заняться исправлением бедственного положения дел в правозащитной сфере и прислушаться к мнению собственного народа и авторитетных международных институтов. России хорошо известно, к чему приводит расизм, возведенный в ранг политической доктрины. Мы помним уроки Второй мировой войны и попытки переписать ее историю. Бескомпромиссная борьба с современной формой расизма, включая такие уродливые, как неонацизм, должна стать приоритетом для мирового сообщества. Сегодняшняя ситуация – грозное предупреждение. Насилие и вандализм в ходе протестов недопустимы и должны преследоваться по закону. Но всего этого можно было бы избежать, построив недискриминационную модель общества, основанную на подлинном равенстве и уважении, где нет места шовинизму и расовой нетерпимости. Благодарю вас.
Thank you, Ambassador. And the next speaker is China.
谢谢主席女士。中国一贯反对一切形式的种族主义和种族歧视，支持非洲国家倡议人权理事会举行此次紧急辩论。我们对弗洛伊德的死亡深感震惊和悲痛。向他的家人致以诚挚的慰问。生命至上，黑人的命也是命。正如人权高专巴切莱特女士和许多特别机制专家所说的那样，弗洛伊德事件不是孤立的，反映了美国长期存在根深蒂固的种族歧视、警察暴力和社会不平等。我们敦促美国倾听国际社会的呼声，切实履行其国际人权义务，消除种族主义、种族歧视和其他侵犯人权的现象，切实保障少数族裔的合法权利，在国际上停止将人权作为政治工具，摒弃双重标准的做法。我们呼吁国际社会凝聚共识， 全面落实德班宣言和行动纲领，支持人权理事会、人权高专办在反对种族主义问题上加大努力，共同推进国际反对种族主义的事业。谢谢主席女士。
Thank you, Ambassador. And we'll take one last speaker for today. I'm sorry for the others. We'll have to continue tomorrow. So the floor goes to Switzerland.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Les récentes manifestations aux États-Unis, ainsi que dans de nombreux autres pays, nous rappellent la nécessité de réaffirmer l'égalité de tous les êtres humains et de renforcer notre engagement à respecter et à protéger les droits de l'homme de toutes et tous, sans discrimination aucune. Malgré l'engagement bien connu des États-Unis pour la protection des droits de l'homme, la Suisse est préoccupée par les cas d'usage disproportionné de la force par les services de sécurité à l'égard de la communauté afro-américaine dans le pays. La Suisse appelle tous les États, dont les États-Unis, à garantir une protection équitable et effective contre les violences policières et discriminations, notamment en raison de l'origine, de la couleur, du sexe, de la langue, de la religion et des opinions politiques ou autres opinions, ou de l'orientation sexuelle et de l'identité de genre. Dans ce contexte, la Suisse rappelle l'importance de la Convention internationale sur l'élimination de toutes les formes de discrimination raciale, ratifiée par un grand nombre d'États. La Suisse rappelle également l'obligation de tous les États à garantir les droits aux libertés de réunion pacifique et d'expression lors des manifestations. Notre pays s'engage à ce sujet par le biais notamment de la résolution sur la promotion et la protection des droits de l'homme dans le contexte de manifestations pacifiques qu'elle présentera à nouveau durant la 44e session. Je vous remercie de votre attention.
Merci beaucoup. And as I said, this was unfortunately the last speaker for today. So we'll reconvene tomorrow at 10 o'clock in this assembly hall here to continue the urgent debate and take action on the draft resolution. This will then be followed by the continuation of the interactive dialogue with the independent expert on Mali, which we were not able to conclude this morning. Thank you very much. I hereby declare closed the 40th meeting of the 43rd session of the Human Rights Council. Good evening to all of you.